9-year-old Daniel's screams shattered the mansion as he hurled his mother's photograph across the study, glass exploding. "I hate you." His twin Dara sobbed behind a locked bathroom door. The billionaire mogul stood frozen as sirens wailed. Another nanny had called emergency services. Could anyone save this devastated family before it self-destructed? The paramedics found no physical injuries when they arrived at the imposing Rapp estate, their equipment cases echoing through marble hallways that had once rung with children's laughter. Daniel's violent outburst had been pure emotional devastation, not self-harm. But the destroyed study painted a clear picture of a family in complete crisis. Shattered glass from his mother's silver-framed photograph littered the Persian rug like broken promises, while medical responders carefully checked the boy for cuts despite his defiant resistance. Arthur Rapp watched from the doorway, his tall frame rigid with helplessness as strangers invaded his private sanctuary. At 42, the tech mogul who commanded boardrooms with ease found himself powerless against his children's grief. His dark hair showed premature silver at the temples, and his usually immaculate appearance was disheveled from another sleepless night of crisis management. "Sir, we need to ask about his emotional state," the lead paramedic said gently, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd seen too many family tragedies. "Has he been having episodes like this frequently?" Before Arthur could answer, Mrs. Tina Gates emerged from the kitchen, her gray hair escaping its bun and her sensible shoes clicking nervously on the marble. The latest in a string of failed nannies, she clutched her resignation letter with trembling hands, her face flushed with embarrassment and defeat. "I tried to move his mother's photos to clean up broken glass from yesterday's tantrum," she explained tearfully to the paramedics, her Scottish accent thick with emotion. "The poor lamb just exploded, started throwing things and screaming that I was trying to erase her memory. I've worked with difficult children for 30 years, but this..." She shook her head, unable to finish. Arthur's jaw tightened as he absorbed yet another failure. Mrs. Gates had lasted longer than most, nearly 3 weeks, but like the 6 caregivers before her, she was abandoning ship. The twins' raw grief had proved too intense for even the most experienced professionals. "Dad?" Dara's voice called weakly from upstairs, muffled by the bathroom door she'd barricaded herself behind. "Is Danny okay? I've heard the sirens." The sound of his daughter's fear cut through Arthur like a blade. Both twins were drowning in loss, but while Daniel erupted outward with rage, Dara retreated inward, her grief manifesting as stomach pains, nightmares, and anxiety attacks that left her unable to attend school for weeks at a time. "Danny's fine, sweetheart," Arthur called back, his voice catching despite his attempt at normalcy. "The nice people are just making sure he's not hurt." The paramedics' radio crackled with another emergency call, and she began packing equipment with efficient movements. "I strongly recommend immediate psychological intervention," she told Arthur quietly. "These children are exhibiting severe trauma responses. If you don't address this soon..." She didn't need to finish. Arthur had heard similar warnings from pediatricians, school counselors, and child psychologists. His children were self-destructing, and traditional nannies couldn't provide the specialized care they desperately needed. Mrs. Gates approached with obvious reluctance, her kind eyes brimming with genuine regret. "Mr. Rapp, I'm so very sorry, but I can't continue. I've left my resignation on your desk. The twins need someone with expertise in childhood trauma, not just childcare. Someone who understands grief at this level." Arthur nodded curtly, his throat too tight for words. Another caregiver fleeing, another failure to add to his growing list. The mansion felt increasingly like a mausoleum, with him and his children trapped inside their shared pain, slowly suffocating on memories of the vibrant woman who had once filled these rooms with warmth. As the emergency responders left and Mrs. Gates gathered her belongings, Arthur sank into his desk chair, surrounded by the wreckage of his son's rage. Family photos lay scattered among broken glass, wedding pictures, vacation memories, candid shots of his wife Elena's radiant smile. Each image felt like evidence of a life that no longer existed, happiness that seemed impossible to reclaim. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister-in-law Victoria. "I have a recommendation. Stacy Black, grief counselor specializing in children. Worth a try before you lose them completely. Arthur stared at the message, feeling the weight of desperation. Victoria had her own opinions about how he should handle his family's recovery, most of them involving moving on too quickly for his comfort. But with his children spiraling deeper into trauma and no other options remaining, perhaps it was time to try something radically different. He typed back, "Send me her information." The response came immediately. "Already scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Don't screw this up, Arthur. Those kids need help you can't give them." Arthur set down his phone and surveyed the destruction around him. Tomorrow would bring another stranger into their broken world, another chance for failure. But as Dara's muffled sobs drifted down from upstairs and Daniel sat in stubborn silence on the stairs, Arthur realized he was running out of choices. His empire could weather any business crisis, but this personal devastation threatened to consume everything that truly mattered. If this Stacy Black could somehow reach his children where everyone else had failed, then perhaps there was still hope for healing in this house of sorrows. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the estate, promising the kind of dramatic weather that seemed to mirror the chaos inside. Arthur began collecting the scattered photographs, handling each memory with careful reverence, wondering if love could ever truly return to a family so thoroughly shattered by loss. The next afternoon arrived with deceptive sunshine streaming through the mansion's tall windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the marble foyer. Arthur had spent the morning cleaning his study and briefing the household staff about their visitor, though he privately wondered if this grief counselor would last any longer than her predecessors. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell's melodious chime echoed through the house. Arthur straightened his tie and opened the door, fully expecting to greet another severe, clipboard-wielding professional in sensible shoes and a forgettable blazer. Instead, he found himself face-to-face with the most unexpectedly beautiful woman he'd encountered in years. Stacy Black stood confidently on his marble steps, her warm brown skin glowing in the afternoon light, and her natural curls framing a face that radiated both intelligence and compassion. She was generously curved in all the right places, her professional burgundy dress flattering her plus-size figure while maintaining appropriate dignity. But it was her eyes that caught Arthur completely off guard, deep amber that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed barriers. "Mr. Rapp?" Her voice carried a gentle southern lilt that immediately put him at ease. "I'm Stacy Black. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Arthur found himself momentarily speechless, an unusual occurrence for a man accustomed to commanding million-dollar negotiations. Something about her presence felt different from the parade of stern nannies who'd marched through his door. She radiated warmth where others had projected efficiency, compassion where they'd offered mere competence. "Please, come in," he managed, stepping aside to let her enter. As she moved past him, he caught a subtle hint of vanilla and jasmine perfume that seemed to brighten the usually oppressive atmosphere of his home. "What a beautiful home," Stacy said genuinely, her appreciative gaze taking in the crystal chandelier and elegant furnishings. "I can feel the love that went into creating this space." Arthur's chest tightened unexpectedly. Elena had chosen every piece of furniture, every color scheme, every artistic detail. Most visitors commented on the obvious wealth or impressive architecture, but Stacy had somehow sensed the deeper emotional foundation beneath the material beauty. "My wife designed everything," he said softly. Then immediately regretted the admission. He wasn't usually so forthcoming with strangers. "She had exquisite taste," Stacy replied without the awkward sympathy he'd grown accustomed to. "And I'm sure she filled it with even more beautiful memories." They settled in the living room, where afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elena's rose garden. Arthur had chosen this room deliberately. It felt less formal than his study, though he couldn't explain why that mattered with this particular visitor. "Tell me about Daniel and Dara," Stacy said, pulling a leather portfolio from her bag but leaving it closed. "Not their symptoms or behaviors, but who they are as people. What makes them laugh? What did they love doing with their mother?" The question surprised Arthur. Every other professional had immediately launched into assessment protocols and behavioral management strategies. Stacy seemed more interested in understanding his children's hearts than cataloging their problems. Daniel is passionate about everything, Arthur began, finding himself warming to the subject despite his usual reserve. He inherited his mother's fire. When Elena would garden, he'd dig holes 3 times too deep because he wanted to make sure the flowers had enough room to grow. He builds elaborate Lego cities and creates backstories for every miniature person. A smile tugged at Arthur's lips as memories surfaced. Dara is quieter, but incredibly observant. She notices things others miss: when someone is sad, when a plant needs water, when her brother is about to have a meltdown. Elena used to say Dara had an old soul and a young body. They sound remarkable, Stacy said warmly. And how are they processing their grief? Arthur's smile faded. Daniel explodes with rage. Yesterday he destroyed my study because the nanny tried to move Elena's photographs. Dara retreats. She locks herself in bathrooms or hides under beds. Both of them have nightmares and refuse to discuss their mother's death. That's completely normal for children their age, Stacy assured him. Grief manifests differently in everyone, but 9-year-olds often lack the emotional vocabulary to express such overwhelming loss. Daniel's anger and Dara's withdrawal are both ways of trying to maintain control in a situation where they feel powerless. Arthur found himself leaning forward, drawn in by her understanding. 7 nannies have quit in 18 months. They all said the children were too difficult, too traumatized for standard childcare. Because they're not broken things to be managed, Stacy said with gentle firmness. They're wounded hearts that need healing. There's a significant difference. Something in her tone sent an unexpected warmth through Arthur's chest. When she spoke about wounded hearts, he found himself wondering if she could heal more than just children's pain. A crash from upstairs interrupted his thoughts, followed by Dara's frightened cry. Arthur was on his feet instantly, but Stacy's calm voice stopped him. "May I?" she asked, rising gracefully. "Sometimes a fresh perspective can help." Arthur hesitated. Every other caregiver had required extensive briefings about the twins' triggers and behavior patterns, but something about Stacy's confidence made him nod agreement. They climbed the curved staircase together, their footsteps echoing in the high-ceilinged hallway. The noise had come from the playroom, where Arthur found Daniel standing amid scattered board games, his small face flushed with anger. "I hate this stupid game," Daniel shouted, kicking at Monopoly pieces. "Mom always let me be the car, and now it's broken." Dara huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face, as she clutched a stuffed elephant their mother had given her. "Danny, please stop," she whispered. "You're scaring me." Arthur stepped forward to intervene, but Stacy's gentle hand on his arm stopped him. She approached the children slowly, her movements deliberately non-threatening. "Hi, Daniel," she said softly, kneeling to his eye level without trying to clean up the scattered game pieces. "I'm Stacy. This looks like a really important card to you." Daniel glared at her suspiciously. "It's broken. Everything gets broken here." "I can see that it's special," Stacy acknowledged. "Can you tell me why it mattered so much to your mom that you were the car?" The question seemed to deflate some of Daniel's rage. "She said I was her little driver. That someday I'd drive her everywhere when she got old and couldn't see good." Arthur's throat constricted. He'd forgotten that particular game between Elena and their son. The way she'd always insisted he choose the car piece while she took the thimble, claiming she was too tiny for anything else. "That sounds like a beautiful promise between you two," Stacy said gently. "And even though the game piece broke, do you think that promise is still true?" Daniel's lower lip trembled. "She can't get old now. She's gone." "You're right," Stacy agreed, surprising him with her honesty. "She can't get old. But the love behind that promise, that's still here. It's in how you remember driving games with her, in how you're taking care of her memory by being upset when something special gets broken." From her corner, Dara sniffled loudly. Stacy turned to include her without making sudden movements. "Hi, Dara. That elephant looks very important too." "Mama gave him to me when I was scared of thunderstorms," Dara whispered. "She said he would keep me safe when she couldn't." "He's doing a good job," Stacy observed. "You're holding him very carefully." Arthur watched in amazement as both children gradually relaxed in Stacy's presence. She didn't try to fix their pain or redirect their attention. Instead, she honored their grief while gently helping them see that love persisted beyond loss. "Would it be okay if I sat here with you for a few minutes?" Stacy asked. "I brought some art supplies in my bag. Sometimes drawing helps when words feel too hard." Daniel looked skeptical, but Dara nodded tentatively. Arthur found himself holding his breath as Stacy retrieved sketch pads and colored pencils from her portfolio, settling cross-legged on the carpet between his children. "There's no right or wrong way to draw feelings," she said, beginning her own sketch with confident strokes. "Sometimes my feelings look like storms, sometimes like flowers, sometimes like nothing anyone else would recognize." Within minutes, both twins were absorbed in their own drawings. Daniel created explosive bursts of red and black that clearly represented his anger, while Dara drew delicate purple flowers surrounding a gray cloud. Arthur watched from the doorway, mesmerized by this woman's intuitive understanding of childhood grief. But it was more than professional admiration stirring in his chest. When Stacy's face lit up with genuine delight at Daniel's artistic choices, Arthur felt something shift inside him. When she listened to Dara's whispered explanation of her drawing with complete focus, his breath caught unexpectedly. "Dad," Daniel's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can Stacy stay for dinner?" Arthur met Stacy's questioning gaze across the room, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with possibility. Her amber eyes held warmth that made him want to say yes to anything she suggested, want to keep that gentle presence in his home for as long as possible. "If she'd like to," Arthur heard himself saying, surprising everyone including himself. Stacy's smile could have powered the entire mansion. "I'd love to." As she turned back to the children's artwork, Arthur realized he was in dangerous territory. For the first time since Elena's death, he found himself attracted to another woman, not just physically, though Stacy's curves and confidence definitely stirred dormant desires 18 months in the making. Arthur realized that Elena's death had forced him to become both mother and father to his children. In learning to nurture their grief, he had inadvertently begun healing his own. Stacy hadn't replaced Elena's love. She had awakened his capacity to love again without betraying Elena's memory. The guilt crashed over him like a cold wave. How could he feel anything for another woman when his wife had been gone, barely 18 months, when his children were still drowning in grief, when Elena's presence still permeated every corner of their home? But watching Stacy bring light back to his children's faces, Arthur couldn't deny the truth blazing through his confusion. This remarkable woman was awakening something in him that he'd thought died with Elena. Hope that his family might actually heal, that joy might return to their broken home, and perhaps, despite his guilt and terror, that he might learn to live again instead of merely surviving. The afternoon stretched into evening as Stacy worked her quiet magic with the twins. By dinner time, Daniel was showing her his elaborate Lego constructions, while Dara shyly shared stories about her stuffed animal collection. Arthur found himself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in months, as Stacy created silly voices for different toys. During dinner, she listened intently as the children described their school experiences and friendship challenges, offering gentle guidance without lecturing or fixing. Arthur noticed how naturally she balanced attention between both twins, never favoring the more outgoing Daniel over the quieter Dara. "Miss Stacy," Dara said as they finished dessert, "will you come back tomorrow?" "Would you like me to?" Stacy asked. Both children nodded eagerly, the first genuine enthusiasm Arthur had seen from them in months. "Then I'll be here," Stacy promised. After the twins went to bed with unusually little resistance, Arthur walked Stacy to her car in the circular driveway. The evening air carried the scent of Elena's roses, and for once, the fragrance felt like a blessing rather than a painful reminder. "Thank you," Arthur said simply. "I haven't seen them respond to anyone like that since their mother died," Stacy finished gently. "They're remarkable children, Arthur. They just need someone who understands that grief is love with nowhere to go. Once we help them find healthy places for all that love, they'll flourish." Arthur found himself stepping closer drawn by her warmth and the way moonlight caught the gold flecks in her amber eyes. And what about adults with grief and love and nowhere to put it? The question slipped out before he could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than he'd intended. Stacy's expression softened with understanding that made his chest tighten with dangerous longing. "The same thing applies," she said, quietly. "Grief means you loved deeply. The goal isn't to forget or replace that love, but to make room for joy alongside the sorrow." Her words hit Arthur like a revelation. For 18 months, he believed that moving forward meant betraying Elena's memory, that happiness would somehow diminish what they'd shared. But standing in his driveway with this extraordinary woman who'd brought laughter back to his children's voices, Arthur began to wonder if Elena would want them all trapped in perpetual mourning. "I should go," Stacy said, though neither of them moved toward her car. "Tomorrow, we'll work on some coping strategies for Daniel's anger and tools to help Dara feel safer expressing her emotions." "Stacy," Arthur's voice was rougher than intended. "I know this is a professional arrangement, but what you did with them today was magic. Pure magic." Her smile was radiant in the moonlight. "Sometimes healing looks like magic when you've been living in darkness for too long." As her car disappeared down the tree-lined drive, Arthur stood in his garden, breathing the night air and feeling truly alive for the first time since Elena's death. Stacy Black had walked into their devastated family and somehow made broken pieces fit together again. But more than that, she'd awakened feelings in him that both thrilled and terrified him. The way his pulse quickened when she smiled, the way he'd found excuses to be near her throughout the evening, the way her laugh seemed to chase shadows from every corner of his heart. His phone buzzed with an urgent text from his sister-in-law Victoria. "We need to talk. Now. I know what you're thinking about that woman, and you're making a terrible mistake. The children's inheritance is at stake. Meet me at Elena's grave tomorrow morning, alone." Arthur's blood turned to ice as he stared at the message. Victoria knew. Somehow, she'd sensed his growing feelings for Stacy, and now she was threatening everything he'd worked to protect. His hands trembled as another text appeared. "Don't make me take this to the lawyers, Arthur. Elena would be ashamed." The words hit him like physical blows, guilt and terror crashing over him in waves. Just as he'd begun to hope that healing was possible, that maybe he could feel alive again without betraying Elena's memory, Victoria was pulling him back into the darkness. And tomorrow, he would have to choose between his growing feelings for the woman who was saving his family and the threats that could destroy everything they'd built together. Arthur barely slept that night, Victoria's threatening messages replaying in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't escape. At dawn, he found himself standing before Elena's marble headstone in the family cemetery, morning mist swirling around the elaborate monument he'd commissioned in her memory. "You're 15 minutes late," Victoria's cold voice cut through the silence. Elena's older sister emerged from behind a towering oak tree, her designer suit and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to the natural cemetery setting. Victoria had always lived in Elena's shadow, the less beautiful, less charming, less beloved sister. Elena's death had finally given Victoria a chance to be the important one in the children's lives, and she wasn't about to let Arthur's romantic interests threaten that position. At 52, Victoria Caldwell commanded respect in Boston's legal circles, but her expression held none of the warmth Elena had possessed. "What do you want, Victoria?" Arthur asked wearily, exhaustion making him less diplomatic than usual. "I want to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life," she replied sharply, placing a bouquet of white lilies on Elena's grave with reverent precision. "That woman you've been mooning over like a lovesick teenager? She's completely inappropriate for this family." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Stacy is helping my children heal in ways no one else could. Daniel and Dara are finally—" "Oh, please." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "You think I'm blind. I see how you look at her, Arthur. How you find excuses to hover around when she's working. You're dishonoring my sister's memory by developing feelings for the help." The casual dismissal of Stacy as the help ignited Arthur's protective instincts. She's a licensed therapist with advanced degrees in childhood trauma. She's brilliant, compassionate, and completely wrong for you," Victoria interrupted ruthlessly. "Elena was raised in our world, understood the expectations and responsibilities that come with the rat name. This Stacy person, she'll never fit into elite society. The children need stability, not another woman who'll eventually disappoint them." Arthur stared at his sister-in-law in disbelief. "You're talking about social status while my children were literally destroying themselves with grief. Stacy saved them." "Temporarily, perhaps. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When she realizes the vast differences between your worlds and leaves? The twins will be devastated all over again." Victoria's voice softened with calculated manipulation. "Elena made me promise to protect those children if anything happened to her. I won't let you expose them to unnecessary heartbreak." The mention of Elena's promise hit Arthur like a physical blow. His wife had indeed asked Victoria to watch over the family, though he doubted this was what she'd had in mind. "The Children's Trust Fund contains provisions about moral character," Victoria continued relentlessly. "If the trustees determine that you're making choices that negatively impact Daniel and Dara's well-being, they can remove you as guardian and transfer custody to me." Arthur's blood turned to ice. "You're threatening to take my children? I'm offering to save them from watching their father make a fool of himself over an inappropriate woman." Victoria's tone remained maddeningly calm. "End this infatuation now, before it goes any further. Find someone suitable if you must remarry eventually. Someone from our social circle who understands the expectations." The words hung between them like poison in the morning air. Arthur looked at Elena's headstone, reading the inscription he'd chosen. "Beloved wife and mother who filled every heart with joy." Would Elena want him trapped in perpetual mourning, or would she want him to embrace the happiness Stacy brought to their broken family? "I need time to think," Arthur said finally. "You have until Monday," Victoria replied crisply. "Either dismiss this woman professionally and personally, or I'll be forced to petition the courts about the children's best interests. Don't make me destroy you, Arthur. I'd rather not put the twins through a custody battle, but I will if necessary." As Victoria walked away, leaving Arthur alone with his wife's grave and impossible choices, he felt the familiar suffocation of grief closing around him. Just when hope had finally returned to his life, the past was dragging him back into darkness. The weekend passed in agonizing tension. Arthur met through the motions of normalcy with his children, but internally he was at war with himself. Every time he saw Stacy working patiently with Daniel and Dara, every moment of laughter she brought to their home, every gentle touch she used to comfort his twins, Arthur felt torn between desperate longing and paralyzing guilt. Monday morning arrived with devastating clarity. Arthur made his decision and waited in his study for Stacy's arrival, dreading the conversation that would either save or destroy what remained of his heart. The following weeks transformed the Rat Mansion in ways Arthur had both hoped for and feared. Stacy's daily presence brought revolutionary changes to his children's emotional state, but also to his own carefully guarded heart. She approached the twins' grief not as a problem to solve, but as a natural response to profound loss that deserved respect and patience. Under Stacy's guidance, Daniel's violent outbursts gradually gave way to more constructive expressions of anger. She taught him to punch specially designated pillows instead of walls, to draw his fury in bold strokes across oversized canvases, to channel his protective instincts into caring for the household plants Elena had loved. Watching his son water the garden with fierce concentration, Arthur marveled at how Stacy had transformed destructive rage into nurturing responsibility. "The anger isn't the problem," Stacy explained to Arthur one afternoon as they watched Daniel carefully tend to his mother's rose bushes. "The anger is Daniel's way of protecting his love for his mother. Once he understands that caring for her memory can be gentle instead of violent, he'll channel that protective energy more positively." Arthur found himself studying Stacy's profile as she spoke, noting the way afternoon light caught the gold undertones in her dark skin, how her full lips curved when she discussed breakthrough moments with his children. The growing attraction he felt toward this remarkable woman both thrilled and terrified him, especially with Victoria's threats echoing in his memory. Dara's progress was quieter but equally profound. The little girl who had spent months hiding began emerging from her self-imposed isolation under Stacy's patient encouragement. Through art therapy, journaling, and gentle conversations that honored her need for privacy while encouraging connection, Dara slowly learned to express fear and sadness without being overwhelmed by them. Miss Stacy understands us, Dara confided to Arthur one evening after sharing a particularly difficult memory about missing her mother's bedtime stories. She doesn't try to make us forget Mama. She helps us remember the good parts without crying so much. Arthur watched this remarkable woman work with his children and felt grudging admiration evolving into something far more dangerous. The way Stacy moved through his house with graceful confidence, how she seemed to understand his family's needs better than he understood them himself, the gentle authority with which she guided healing. All of it stirred feelings he'd thought buried with his wife. But admiration wasn't the only emotion growing stronger each day. When Stacy knelt to comfort one of the twins, Arthur found his gaze lingering on the elegant curve of her neck. When she laughed at Daniel's silly jokes, the sound sent warmth spiraling through his chest. When she looked directly at him with those perceptive amber eyes during their daily briefings, he felt exposed and exhilarated in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. 3 weeks into Stacy's tenure, Arthur's carefully maintained emotional distance began cracking under the pressure of forced proximity. He started finding excuses to be present during her sessions, checking on lunch preparations, reviewing household schedules, lingering in hallways just to hear her voice floating from the playroom. Have you ever watched someone work magic with wounded hearts when everyone else had given up? Tell me about a time someone showed you unexpected grace. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if this story is already touching your soul. The morning everything changed started with Daniel having one of his increasingly rare meltdowns. Arthur had cautiously suggested modifying the twins' bedroom, removing some of Elena's personal items to help them process grief more healthily. The suggestion had triggered Daniel's most explosive tantrum in weeks. "You want to erase Mama?" Daniel screamed, throwing art supplies across the playroom with renewed fury. "First you moved her pictures, now you want to throw away her things. I won't let you forget her." Arthur stood helplessly in the doorway as his son's rage filled the room like a toxic cloud. Every parenting instinct urged him to intervene with firm discipline, but his attempts usually escalated Daniel's fury rather than calming it. The weight of Victoria's threats made every decision feel monumental. Stacy approached the situation with her characteristic calm, but this time Arthur found himself questioning her unconventional methods. The pressure of choosing between his growing feelings and his family's security made him defensive and critical. "Perhaps we should establish firmer boundaries," he interjected sharply. "Daniel needs to learn that destructive behavior has consequences, regardless of emotional justification." Stacy turned to face him, her amber eyes flashing with uncharacteristic intensity. "He's 9 years old and processing trauma, not a business executive who needs corporate discipline." "He's my son," Arthur replied, his stress and guilt over the bedroom suggestion making him unusually confrontational. "I think I know what's best for him." "Do you?" Stacy challenged, stepping closer with a confidence that made Arthur's pulse quicken despite his irritation. "Because from where I stand, rigid control is exactly what drove 6 other caregivers away. Daniel doesn't need more rules, he needs understanding." They were standing too close now, close enough that Arthur could see golden flecks in her eyes, could smell the vanilla and jasmine scent that had haunted his dreams for weeks. Her passionate defense of his children's emotional needs stirred something primal in his chest, admiration and attraction tangling into dangerous territory that Victoria had specifically warned him against. "I'm trying to help my family heal," Arthur said, his voice rougher than intended. "Not everyone agrees with your unconventional approach to childhood development." "Unconventional?" Stacy's voice rose slightly, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine passion. You mean effective? You mean treating children like human beings, with valid emotions, instead of problems to be managed. The argument hung between them, charged with tension that had nothing to do with Daniel's tantrum, and everything to do with the awareness crackling between them. Arthur found himself noting how Stacy's chest rose and fell with passionate breathing, how her curls framed her face when she tilted her chin defiantly, how absolutely magnificent she looked when defending his children with fierce maternal instincts. A sudden giggle broke through their standoff. Both adults turned to find Daniel watching them with fascination rather than fury, his tantrum forgotten in the face of this unexpected entertainment. "Are you guys fighting about me?" he asked with childlike directness. "Because you look like you want to kiss each other." The observation hit like lightning, making both Arthur and Stacy step back abruptly. But the damage was done. The tension between them was now visible, even to a 9-year-old. Impossible to deny or dismiss. "We were discussing different approaches to help you process emotions," Stacy said carefully, her professional composure returning, though Arthur noticed the flush coloring her dark skin. "It's okay," Daniel said with surprising wisdom. "Mama used to say grown-ups sometimes fight when they care about something a lot. Do you care about us a lot, Miss Stacy?" "Very much," Stacy answered truthfully, her voice soft with genuine affection. Daniel nodded solemnly. "Then it's okay if you and Dad fight sometimes, as long as you don't leave like the other nannies." The innocent words cut through Arthur's defenses like a blade. His son wasn't just accepting Stacy's presence. He was dependent on it, trusting it in ways that made Arthur's growing feelings even more complicated and dangerous. Later that evening, after the twins were settled with homework and Stacy was gathering her things to leave, Arthur found her in the kitchen, reviewing session notes. The setting sun streaming through the windows cast golden light across her face, and Arthur felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling further despite Victoria's dire warnings. "I owe you an apology," he said, approaching slowly. "You were right about Daniel. I was projecting my own fear onto the situation." Stacy looked up from her notes, and Arthur felt the familiar jolt of awareness when their eyes met. "You're under enormous pressure, Arthur. Single-parenting traumatized children while running a company would challenge anyone." Her understanding only made the attraction stronger. Arthur found himself moving closer, drawn by the warmth in her voice and the way she said his name like a caress. "It's more than that," he admitted quietly. "I've been questioning everything lately. My methods, my choices, whether I'm helping or hurting them by holding on to the past so tightly." "Grief doesn't follow timelines or rules," Stacy said gently. "You're all healing at your own pace, and that's perfectly normal." "What about when grief starts making room for other feelings?" The question slipped out before Arthur could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than he'd intended. "Feelings that seem impossible but will be denied?" Stacy's breath caught slightly, understanding immediately what he meant. The air between them became charged with possibility and danger, both recognizing they were approaching territory that could change everything. "Arthur," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing her cheek with reverent gentleness. "I know this is impossible. I know there are 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't. But we can't help how we feel," Stacy finished softly, leaning into his touch despite every professional instinct warning her away. The moment stretched between them, filled with longing and the promise of something beautiful and terrifying. Arthur's thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone as he memorized the way amber light caught in her eyes, the way her lips parted slightly in invitation. Just as he began to lower his head toward hers, the kitchen door swung open with violent force. "Well, well," Victoria's cold voice cut through the intimate moment like a blade. "I see my warnings fell on deaf ears." Arthur and Stacy sprang apart, but it was too late. Victoria stood in the doorway with her phone raised, clearly having captured photographic evidence of their almost kiss. "I tried to give you a chance to end this appropriately," Victoria continued with deadly calm. "But since you've chosen to ignore my advice, I'll be filing custody papers in the morning. I've had someone watching this house since Elena's funeral." Every interaction, every lingering glance, every moment you've prioritized your attraction over my sister's memory. Did you think I wouldn't notice how you hover around her sessions? Find excuses to be near her. The children deserve better than watching their father betray their mother's memory with the help. Arthur's world tilted on its axis as he realized the trap he'd walked into. Victoria had been watching, waiting for exactly this moment to destroy everything he cared about. And now, with one photograph, she had the ammunition to take his children away forever. The silence that followed Victoria's threat was deafening. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Losing his children was his worst nightmare, and Victoria held the power to make it reality with a single photograph. "Victoria, please," Arthur began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "The papers will be filed at 9 a.m. sharp," she said coldly, sliding her phone into her designer purse. "I suggest you use tonight to explain to Daniel and Dara why they'll be coming to live with me permanently. Try to minimize the trauma, though I suppose that ship has sailed." Stacy stepped forward, her professional composure intact, despite the emotional devastation Arthur could see in her eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell, perhaps we could discuss this rationally. The children have made remarkable progress." "With you?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You're the problem, Miss Black. My sister's children don't need someone from your background confusing their healing process with inappropriate relationships." The barely concealed racism in Victoria's tone ignited Arthur's protective fury. "That's enough," he said dangerously. "Stacy's background is impeccable, her methods are revolutionary, and my children adore her. Your children are grieving and vulnerable," Victoria snapped. "They're latching on to anyone who shows them attention. But what happens when this infatuation burns out? When Miss Black realizes she signed up for a lifetime of other people's baggage?" Arthur saw Stacy flinch at the cool words, and something fierce and protective roared to life in his chest. Victoria was attacking the woman who had saved his family, dismissing her worth based on prejudice and jealousy. "Get out," Arthur said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built his empire. "Get out of my house now." "Gladly," Victoria replied smoothly. "I'll see you in court, Arthur, and I'll see you there too, Miss Black. You'll need to explain to a judge why you violated professional ethics by becoming romantically involved with a client." The parting shot hit its mark. Stacy's face went pale as Victoria's heels clicked across the marble foyer and the front door slammed shut with finality. In the sudden silence, Arthur turned to find Stacy backing away from him, her amber eyes wide with panic. "She's right," Stacy whispered. "I've violated every professional boundary. I could lose my license, my career, everything I've worked for." "Stacy, no." Arthur reached for her, but she shook her head frantically. "I have to go," she said, gathering her things with trembling hands. "I can't be the reason you lose your children. I won't be responsible for destroying this family." "You're not destroying anything," Arthur said desperately. "You're saving us. Daniel and Dara need you." "They need their father more," Stacy interrupted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And you need to fight for them without the complication of whatever this is between us." Arthur felt his world fracturing as the woman who had brought light back to his life prepared to walk away. "What if I don't want to fight this battle without you?" Stacy's sob broke his heart. "Then you're not the man I thought you were," she said softly. "A good father puts his children first, always. Even when it destroys everything else." She was gone before Arthur could form another argument, leaving him standing in his kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of hope. For the second time in 18 months, the most important woman in his life had been torn away, and he was powerless to stop it. The next morning brought no relief from the nightmare. Arthur paced his study while his lawyer, Hamilton Pierce, reviewed Victoria's custody petition with grim efficiency. The older man's expression grew darker with each page. "This is comprehensive," Hamilton said finally, removing his reading glasses. "Victoria's claiming parental alienation, questioning your judgment, and citing potential harm to the children's emotional development. The photograph adds weight to her arguments about inappropriate relationships affecting your decision-making. Arthur slumped in his chair, feeling decades older than his 42 years. What are my chances? Honestly, not good. Courts tend to favor stability, and Victoria can provide that. She has no romantic complications, an established household, and Elena's written request that she watch over the children. Hamilton's voice softened slightly. However, there is one factor working in our favor. What? The children themselves. If we can demonstrate that they're thriving under your care, that your relationship with Miss Black was actually beneficial to their healing, we might have a chance. Arthur's laugh was bitter. Stacy won't testify. She's convinced she's violated professional ethics and wants nothing to do with this mess. Then we'll have to convince her otherwise, Hamilton said pragmatically, because without her testimony about the children's progress, you're going to lose them. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, giving Arthur less than a week to mount a defense. But first, he had to find a way to explain to his children why their world was about to be shattered again. That evening, Arthur gathered Daniel and Dara in the living room, where Stacy had first worked her magic with art therapy. The twins immediately sensed something was wrong. "Where's Miss Stacy?" Dara asked anxiously. "She always comes for dinner on Mondays." Arthur's throat tightened. "Miss Stacy won't be coming anymore, sweetheart." "Why not?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising with familiar anger. "Did she quit like all the others?" "It's complicated," Arthur began, but Daniel was already spiraling. "You made her leave," Daniel accused, jumping to his feet. "You always ruin everything. First Mama dies, now you drove away the only person who understood us." "Daniel, that's not. I hate you," Daniel screamed, the words that had become his standard response to overwhelming emotion. "I hate you and I want Miss Stacy back." Dara began crying, overwhelmed by her brother's outburst and the loss of the woman who had become their emotional anchor. "Please bring her back, Daddy," she sobbed. "Please, she makes everything better." Arthur knelt between his children, gathering them close, despite Daniel's resistance. "I'm trying," he whispered. "I'm trying to fix this. But I need you both to be brave for a little while longer." "Are we going to live with Aunt Victoria?" Dara asked, with devastating intuition. Arthur's silence was answer enough. Both children dissolved into tears, and Arthur felt his heart shatter completely. In trying to protect his family from Victoria's threats, he had lost both Stacy and his children's trust. The next few days passed in a blur of legal preparations and emotional devastation. The twins retreated into the shell Stacy had worked so hard to crack, refusing to eat properly or engage with Arthur beyond basic necessities. The house felt tomb-like again. All traces of joy and healing evaporated. Meanwhile, Arthur's attempts to contact Stacy proved futile. She had taken a leave of absence from her practice and wasn't returning calls. Her apartment building's doorman had instructions to turn away all visitors. She had effectively vanished from their lives as completely as if she'd never existed. Thursday evening, less than 24 hours before the custody hearing, Arthur sat in his study, staring at Elena's photograph. The same image Daniel had hurled across the room weeks ago now seemed to mock him with memories of happiness that felt impossibly distant. "I don't know what to do," he whispered to the picture. "I think I'm falling in love with her, Elena. I think she could make us whole again. But everyone says loving her means betraying you, and now I'm going to lose everything anyway." The sound of the front door opening interrupted his desperate monologue. Arthur assumed it was Hamilton arriving with final legal preparations, but the footsteps approaching his study were too light, too familiar. Stacy appeared in his doorway, and Arthur's heart stopped. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. But she was there. After days of absence, she had returned to him. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, her voice hoarse with emotion. "About what you said, about fighting this battle together." Arthur rose slowly, afraid to hope. "Stacy, I was scared," she interrupted. "Scared of losing my career, scared of the judgment, scared of being the reason your children got hurt. But then I realized something. She stepped into the room, and Arthur could see the determination burning in her amber eyes, despite the tears threatening to fall. I realized that running away would hurt them more than fighting for them ever could. Those children need their father, yes, but they also need, she took a shuddering breath. They need someone who understands their pain and knows how to heal it. They need me, Arthur, and God help me, I need them too. Arthur felt hope blazing to life in his chest. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Victoria has photographs, testimony about professional ethics violations. Let her bring everything she has, Stacy said fiercely. I'll tell that judge exactly what those children were like when I met them, and what they've become under my care. I'll explain how love and healing aren't violations of ethics. They're the whole point. Arthur moved toward her slowly, hardly daring to believe she was really there. Are you sure? Victoria will try to destroy you. She can try, Stacy said, lifting her chin with magnificent defiance. But I'm not going anywhere. Not when we're this close to giving Daniel and Dara the family they deserve. They stood facing each other across the room. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances and were finally ready to fight for it together. Arthur felt Elena's photograph watching them, and for the first time, he imagined his late wife's blessing rather than her condemnation. There's something else, Stacy said softly. Something I need to tell you before tomorrow. Arthur's pulse quickened at her serious tone. What is it? Stacy took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I love you, Arthur. I love you and Daniel and Dara with everything I have. I know it's too soon, I know it's complicated, but if we're going to fight for this family, you need to know that my feelings are real. This isn't just professional attachment or misplaced nurturing instincts. The words hit Arthur like lightning. Beautiful and terrifying and absolutely right. He crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her face in his hands. I love you too, he said fiercely. I've been fighting it for weeks, feeling guilty and scared and completely lost. But you've brought life back to this house, joy back to my children, hope back to my heart. They moved toward each other like magnets drawn by irresistible force. Arthur's hands tangled in Stacy's curls as her arms circled his neck. Both of them desperate for the connection they'd been denying themselves. Their lips met in a kiss that was hungry and tender, desperate and reverent all at once. Arthur poured 18 months of loneliness into that kiss, while Stacy gave him every ounce of love she'd been afraid to acknowledge. It was a claiming and a promise, a vow that whatever happened tomorrow, they would face it together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, as they shared the same air. Whatever Victoria throws at us tomorrow, Arthur whispered, we face it as a team. Together, Stacy agreed, sealing the promise with another soft kiss. But as they held each other in the study where this journey had begun, neither of them heard the soft click of a camera phone from the hallway. Victoria's private investigator had been watching the house all evening, waiting for exactly this moment. By midnight, Victoria would have even more damaging evidence for tomorrow's hearing, evidence that could destroy not just Arthur's custody case, but any chance of the family's survival. The war for Daniel and Dara's future was about to become bloodier than either Arthur or Stacy could imagine. The courthouse steps felt like walking toward an execution the next morning. Arthur adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, nerves making his usually steady hands tremble as he watched Hamilton organize legal documents with methodical precision. Stacy stood beside him in a conservative navy suit, her natural confidence masking the terror Arthur could see lurking in her amber eyes. Remember, Hamilton instructed quietly, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. And don't let Victoria's attorney provoke you into emotional responses. The judge will be watching for signs of instability. Arthur nodded, though his attention was focused on the sleek black sedan pulling up to the courthouse. Victoria emerged with predatory grace, flanked by Chris Thornfield, one of Boston's most ruthless family law attorneys. Her smile as she spotted Arthur and Stacy was coldly triumphant. She looks confident, Stacy murmured, unconsciously moving closer to Arthur. She should, Arthur replied grimly. Chris has never lost a custody case. He specializes in destroying families. Inside the courthouse, The formal hearing room felt sterile and intimidating. Judge Margaret Bernards, a stern woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense approach to family law, reviewed the case files with practiced efficiency. Arthur took his seat at the defendant's table, acutely aware that his children's entire future hung in the balance. This hearing will determine the best interests of Daniel and Dara Rapp, Judge Bernards announced. Mrs. Caldwell, as the petitioner, you may present your case first. Victoria rose with theatrical grace, her designer suit and perfectly styled hair projecting an image of stability and respectability. Your Honor, I'm seeking emergency custody of my late sister's children due to their father's increasingly erratic behavior and poor judgment regarding their care. Chris Thornfield took over with the smooth delivery of a practiced performer. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Rapp has placed his own romantic desires above his children's well-being. He has engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a woman hired to provide professional therapeutic services, creating an unstable and confusing environment for traumatized children. Arthur watched in growing horror as Chris methodically presented his case. The first photograph appeared on the courtroom's display screen. Arthur and Stacy's almost kiss in the kitchen, captured at the exact moment their lips were inches apart. This image was taken Monday evening, Chris continued smoothly. Note the intimate positioning, the unprofessional physical contact, the clear violation of therapeutic boundaries while minor children were present in the home. Stacy's sharp intake of breath was audible. Judge Bernard's expression remained neutral, but Arthur caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested disapproval. Furthermore, Chris continued, we have documentation of Miss Black's questionable professional methods. Rather than maintaining appropriate therapeutic distance, she has essentially moved into the family home, blurring boundaries between caregiver, therapist, and romantic interest. The second photograph hit like a physical blow. Arthur and Stacy from the previous evening, locked in their passionate embrace in his study, her hands tangled in his hair while his arms encircled her waist. The image captured the desperate intensity of their reunion, but in the stark legal setting, it looked damning. This photograph was taken last night at approximately 9:30 p.m., Chris announced with devastating calm. Even knowing that this custody hearing was scheduled for today, Mr. Rapp chose to prioritize his romantic relationship over his children's stability. Judge Bernard's frown deepened as she studied the evidence. Miss Black, are you present in the courtroom? Stacy rose on unsteady legs. Yes, Your Honor. Are you currently licensed to practice family therapy in Massachusetts? Yes, Your Honor. And are you aware that romantic relationships with clients are considered violations of professional ethics? Arthur watched Stacy's face pale, but her voice remained steady. Yes, Your Honor, I am aware of those guidelines. Chris pounced on the admission like a predator sensing blood. Your Honor, Miss Black has just admitted to knowingly violating professional ethics. This demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment that extends beyond romantic impropriety into questions of professional competence. Objection, Hamilton interjected. Miss Black is not on trial here, and her therapeutic methods with the children are not in question. Sustained, Judge Bernard said, though her tone suggested the damage was already done. However, the court is concerned about the blurred boundaries in this situation. Victoria took the witness stand with confident poise, painting herself as the stable, appropriate guardian the children needed. She testified about Arthur's emotional instability, his poor judgment in romantic matters, and her deep concern for Daniel and Dara's psychological well-being. Your Honor, Victoria said with practiced sincerity, these children have suffered enough trauma. They don't need the additional confusion of watching their father engage in inappropriate relationships with service providers. They need stability, consistency, and proper moral guidance. Chris produced additional evidence, testimonies from household staff about Arthur's distracted behavior, documentation of the children's previous behavioral problems, and expert opinions about the dangers of romantic relationships in therapeutic settings. Miss Black's presence has created an emotionally charged environment where the children's actual needs are secondary to the adults' romantic desires. Chris argued. This is precisely the kind of selfish behavior that courts exist to protect children from. When Hamilton began Arthur's defense, the damage felt overwhelming. He presented evidence of the children's remarkable progress under Stacy's care, Arthur's devotion as a father, and character witnesses attesting to his stability. But every positive testimony seemed overshadowed by those damning photographs and the specter of professional misconduct. Your Honor, Hamilton argued passionately, Mr. Rapp's children have thrived under his care and Miss Black's therapeutic intervention. To remove them from their father based on photographs taken out of context would be to prioritize appearances over actual child welfare. But Judge Bernard's questions grew sharper. Mr. Rapp, do you believe your romantic feelings for Miss Black have influenced your judgment regarding your children's care? Arthur felt the trap closing around him. Any answer would be wrong. Admitting influence would confirm Victoria's claims, while denying it would seem dishonest. Your Honor, Arthur said carefully, my feelings for Miss Black developed because of how she helped my children heal. She saved my family. That wasn't the question, Judge Bernard said curtly. I asked whether your romantic feelings influenced your professional judgment. The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Arthur realized that his entire defense was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence and ethical violations. Then Stacy rose from her seat without permission. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Bernard's looked surprised but nodded. You may speak, Miss Black, though I should warn you that anything you say could impact your professional license. Stacy walked to the center of the courtroom with quiet dignity, her chin lifted despite the tears Arthur could see threatening to fall. Your Honor, I want to tell you about two children who were destroying themselves with grief when I met them, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Daniel Rapp was so consumed with rage that he was injuring himself and others daily. Dara Rapp had withdrawn so completely that she couldn't attend school or form relationships. 7 previous caregivers had failed because they treated symptoms instead of addressing the underlying trauma. Judge Bernard's leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite herself. In 6 weeks under my care, Daniel learned to channel his protective instincts into nurturing behaviors. Dara began expressing emotions in healthy ways and forming secure attachments. They started sleeping through the night, eating properly, and engaging with their education again. Stacy's voice grew stronger as she continued. Your Honor, you've seen photographs of inappropriate moments between Mr. Rapp and myself. I won't deny that we develop feelings for each other. But what those photographs don't show is Daniel helping his father tend his mother's garden, because I taught him that caring for her memory could be gentle instead of violent. They don't show Dara reading bedtime stories to her father, because I helped her understand that nurturing others honors the nurturing she received from her mother. Arthur felt his heart swelling with love and pride as Stacy fearlessly defended their family. If loving these children enough to risk my career is unprofessional, then I accept that judgment, Stacy continued. If helping their father learn to live again instead of merely surviving is inappropriate, then I embrace that inappropriateness. Because the alternative, watching 3 people I love destroy themselves with unprocessed grief, was unacceptable to me. The courtroom was utterly silent as Stacy finished speaking. Even Chris Thornfield seemed momentarily speechless. Judge Bernard studied the papers before her, then looked directly at Arthur. Mr. Rapp, if I were to award you continued custody, how would you address the ethical complications surrounding Miss Black's role in your household? Arthur rose slowly, knowing this was his last chance to save his family. Your Honor, I would marry her. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Victoria gasped audibly while Chris scrambled to object. Marriage would eliminate any professional conflict of interest, Arthur continued steadily. Stacy would become my wife and the children's stepmother, not their therapist. The healing she's accomplished would continue within appropriate family boundaries. Judge Bernard's raised an eyebrow. And Miss Black, how do you respond to this proposal? Stacy's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Arthur, love and gratitude shining in her expression. I would be honored to become Daniel and Dara's mother, Your Honor. They've already accepted me in that role. I would simply make it legal. Victoria could no longer contain herself. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of impulsive, emotional decision-making that proves Arthur is unfit for custody. He's proposing marriage to solve a legal problem. Actually, Hamilton interjected smoothly, producing a document from his briefcase. Mr. Rapp consulted with me about marriage plans 3 weeks ago, well before these proceedings began. This isn't a desperate legal maneuver. It's a father trying to provide his children with the family structure they need. Arthur stared at his lawyer in amazement. Hamilton had no such document, but was clearly improvising to save their case. Judge Bernard studied all parties with keen intelligence. I'm going to recess for 30 minutes to review the evidence and consider all testimony. As the judge left the courtroom, Arthur turned to find Stacy watching him with wonder and love shining in her eyes. "Did you mean it?" she whispered. "The proposal?" "Every word," Arthur replied, taking her hands in his. "I should have asked properly, with a ring and romance, but—" "Yes," Stacy interrupted, laughing through her tears. "Whatever the answer to your question is, it's yes." But their moment of joy was shattered by Chris Thornfield's cold voice behind them. "I wouldn't celebrate yet," he said with a predatory smile. "I have one more piece of evidence that the judge hasn't seen. Evidence that will destroy any chance of a happy ending." He held up a tablet displaying a video file, and Arthur's blood turned to ice as he recognized the timestamp. Whatever Chris had, it was about to obliterate everything they fought for. Arthur's mouth went dry as Chris held up the tablet with predatory satisfaction. Whatever evidence the ruthless attorney possessed, his confidence suggested it would be devastating. Stacy's hand tightened in Arthur's as they braced for the final blow to their hopes. "What is it?" Hamilton demanded, though his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who knew they were already losing. "Video footage from last night," Chris replied smoothly. "Very enlightening footage that shows exactly what kind of family environment Mr. Rapp is providing for impressionable children." Arthur's mind raced through the previous evening, trying to remember anything that could be used against them. Their passionate reunion had been in his private study. Surely no cameras could have captured that moment. "The investigator has been monitoring the property for weeks," Victoria added with cold triumph. "Every inappropriate interaction, every boundary violation, every moment that proves Arthur prioritizes his libido over his children's well-being." Judge Bernards would turn to the courtroom with an unreadable expression, immediately sensing the heightened tension. "Mr. Thornfield, I understand you have additional evidence." "Yes, Your Honor. Video evidence that definitively proves the defendant's unfitness as guardians." Chris approached the bench with theatrical flair, holding the tablet like a weapon of mass destruction. Arthur felt the world tilting around him as Chris prepared to play whatever damaging footage would end their fight forever. Stacy's breathing had become shallow, her grip on his hand almost painful in its intensity. However, Chris continued with dramatic pause. "Before presenting this evidence, I believe it's only fair to give the defendants one final opportunity to withdraw their contest to this custody petition. Save the court's time and the children further trauma by accepting that Mrs. Caldwell is the appropriate guardian." The offer hung in the air like poison. Arthur looked at Stacy, seeing his own desperation reflected in her amber eyes. They could surrender now and lose everything, or fight and risk having their most private moments dissected in a public courtroom. "Play the video," Arthur said firmly, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. "I won't abandon my children based on threats and manipulation." Chris smiled coldly and approached the courtroom's display system. "As you wish." But as he connected the tablet, something unexpected happened. The device's screen flickered and went black. Chris frowned, tapping frantically at the screen. "Technical difficulties?" Judge Bernards asked with barely concealed impatience. "A momentary glitch, Your Honor," Chris assured her, but Arthur could see sweat beading on the attorney's forehead as he struggled with the unresponsive device. From the gallery, a small voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Daddy?" Arthur's head whipped around to find Daniel and Dara standing in the courtroom doorway, both children, dressed in their best clothes and looking absolutely terrified. Behind them stood Arthur's housekeeper, Margaret, wringing her hands with obvious distress. "I'm sorry, sir," Margaret called out. "They insisted on coming, said they had something important to tell the judge." Judge Bernards looked frustrated by the irregular proceedings, but her expression softened slightly at the sight of the two children at the center of this legal battle. Daniel and Dara, you shouldn't be here during adult proceedings. Please, Dara said in her quiet voice, stepping forward with surprising courage. We want to tell you about Miss Stacy. We want to tell you why we need her. Victoria stood immediately. Your Honor, the children are being coached. No one coached us, Daniel interrupted, with fierce indignation. We came because grown-ups are making decisions about us without asking what we want. Judge Bernard studied the children with newfound interest. Very well. You may approach the bench, but I need to ask you some questions separately to ensure you're not being influenced. Arthur watched in amazement as his children walked forward with determination that reminded him powerfully of their mother. Elena had possessed that same quiet courage when fighting for something she believed in. Judge Bernard spoke first with Dara, her voice gentle but probing. Sweetheart, can you tell me how you felt before Miss Stacy came to help your family? Scared all the time, Dara answered honestly. My tummy hurt and I couldn't sleep, and I kept hiding because everything felt too big and sad. And how do you feel now? Better, Dara said simply. Miss Stacy taught me that missing Mama doesn't mean I can't be happy sometimes too. She said Mama would want me to smile and play and not hurt all the time. Judge Bernards nodded thoughtfully before turning to Daniel. Daniel, what was it like before Miss Stacy arrived? I was angry every day, Daniel said with startling self-awareness for a 9-year-old. I broke things and yelled and hurt people because I couldn't make the sad feeling stop. Everyone kept leaving because I was too much trouble. And now? Now I know how to take care of Mama's garden instead of breaking her pictures. Daniel explained earnestly. Miss Stacy taught me that being angry about losing Mama means I loved her a lot, but I can love her in good ways instead of scary ways. Arthur felt tears burning his eyes as his children articulated their healing journey with devastating clarity. Across the courtroom, he saw several court personnel wiping their eyes as well. Children, Judge Bernard said carefully, do you understand that your Aunt Victoria wants you to come live with her because she thinks that would be better for you? Both children nodded solemnly. But we want to stay with Daddy and Miss Stacy, Dara said firmly. Aunt Victoria is nice, though she doesn't understand about the sad feelings. She wants us to pretend Mama never existed. That's not true, Victoria protested. But Daniel cut her off with the brutal honesty of childhood. You told Daddy he shouldn't keep Mama's pictures where we could see them, Daniel said accusingly. You said we needed to move on and stop talking about her so much. But Miss Stacy says remembering Mama is how we keep her love alive. Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment as her own words were thrown back at her by a 9-year-old. Furthermore, Daniel continued with impressive vocabulary, Miss Stacy makes Daddy happy. We didn't know how sad he was until we saw him smile again. We want him to marry her so she can be our real mom instead of just our friend who helps with feelings. The courtroom fell silent as the children's testimony hung in the air. Judge Bernard studied all parties with obvious thoughtfulness. Mr. Thornfield, she said finally, I believe you had video evidence to present. Chris frantically tapped his tablet again, but the device remained unresponsive. Your Honor, I'm experiencing technical difficulties with the equipment. Perhaps, Judge Bernard suggested dryly. The court has heard sufficient evidence to make a determination. Arthur held his breath as the judge reviewed her notes one final time. The fate of his family balanced on a knife's edge, and he found himself praying to Elena's memory for guidance and forgiveness. Based on the testimony presented, Judge Bernards began. It's clear that both parties have the children's best interests at heart. However, several factors weigh heavily in my decision. Victoria leaned forward eagerly while Arthur felt his heart hammering against his ribs. First, the children themselves have expressed clear preferences about their living situation and care providers. While children's wishes aren't always determinative in custody cases, their articulate understanding of their own healing process is remarkable. Arthur dared to hope as the judge continued. Second, the evidence shows significant positive changes in both children's emotional and behavioral health under Miss Black's care. Whatever ethical complications exist regarding her relationship with Mr. Rapp, her therapeutic effectiveness is undeniable. Chris tried to interrupt, but Judge Bernard silenced him with a look. Third, while I have concerns about blurred professional boundaries, The proposed marriage would address most ethical issues by establishing appropriate family relationships. Arthur felt Stacy's hand trembling in his as they waited for the final verdict. However, Judge Bernard's continued, and Arthur's heart sank at the ominous word. I cannot ignore the evidence of romantic involvement during active therapeutic treatment. This represents a serious breach of professional ethics that raises questions about judgment and priorities. Victoria's smile returned as the decision seemed to swing in her favor. Therefore, I am ordering a comprehensive custody evaluation to be completed within 90 days. During this period, the children will remain with Mr. Rapp under court supervision and mandatory family counseling, pending the investigation's findings. No, Danielle's anguished scream cut through the judge's words like a knife. You can't take us away from Daddy and Miss Stacy. We'll run away. We'll hide. Please don't make us go. Dara dissolved into hysterical sobs, clinging to the bailiff's desk as if she could physically prevent being removed from the courtroom. The sound of his children's despair broke something fundamental in Arthur's chest. Your Honor, Arthur said desperately, rising from his seat despite Hamilton's restraining hand. Please reconsider. They're terrified. You're traumatizing them all over again. But Judge Bernard's expression had hardened with professional resolve. The children's emotional reaction, while understandable, doesn't change the facts of the case. They will adjust to Mrs. Caldwell's care. They won't, Stacy said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute certainty. Your Honor, I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years. What you're witnessing isn't a tantrum, it's a trauma response. These children are reliving their mother's death. You're taking away everyone they trust and love in one devastating blow. Victoria stood triumphantly, but her smile faltered as she watched her nephew and niece dissolving in terror at the prospect of living with her. The decision is final, Judge Bernards declared. Mrs. Caldwell will take custody immediately and... She was interrupted by the courtroom doors bursting open with such violence that everyone turned in shock. A tall figure strode into the room with purposeful determination, and Arthur's world stopped completely. The man approaching the bench was someone Arthur had never expected to see again. Someone whose presence changed everything about this legal battle in ways no one could have anticipated. Someone who held the power to save or destroy everything Arthur had fought for. A man who strode into the courtroom with commanding presence was Dr. James Morrison, Elena's former oncologist and Arthur's old college friend. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by urgent determination as he approached the bench without regard for courtroom protocol. Your Honor, Dr. Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. I apologize for the interruption, but I have critical information relevant to this custody case. Judge Bernards looked startled by the dramatic entrance but maintained her judicial composure. Sir, these proceedings are nearly concluded. Unless you have standing in this matter. I do, Dr. Morrison interrupted, producing an official-looking document from his briefcase. I am the executor of Elena Rapp's medical directive and personal wishes regarding her children's care. I have been attempting to reach this courtroom for the past hour after learning of these proceedings. Arthur felt his heart leap with desperate hope as Victoria's confident expression crumbled into uncertainty. Elena had trusted Dr. Morrison completely during her final months, often confiding fears and wishes she couldn't share even with Arthur. Your Honor, Chris Thornfield protested, this is highly irregular. Any medical directives would have been disclosed during discovery. Not medical directives, Dr. Morrison clarified, approaching the bench with steady purpose. Personal directives. Letters and instructions Elena gave me during her final treatment, sealed and not to be opened unless her children's welfare was threatened. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Dr. Morrison placed a thick envelope on Judge Bernard's desk. Arthur recognized Elena's elegant handwriting on the cream-colored paper, and his throat tightened with emotion. Elena was very specific about the circumstances that would warrant opening these documents. Dr. Morrison continued. A custody dispute involving her children and questions about their father's ability to provide appropriate care qualified as one of those circumstances. Victoria shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. That's impossible. Elena never mentioned any such documents to me. Because she specifically requested that you not be informed, Dr. Morrison replied with devastating calm. Elena had concerns about your rigid approach to grief and healing. Judge Bernard carefully opened the envelope, revealing several handwritten pages in Elena's distinctive script. Arthur watched the judge's expression change as she read, moving from skepticism to surprise to something approaching reverence. "Your Honor," Hamilton interjected respectfully. "May the parties know the contents of these documents?" Judge Bernard looked up from the pages, her entire demeanor transformed. "These are indeed personal directives from Elena Rapp, written during her final weeks of life. They address specific scenarios regarding her children's care, including potential custody disputes." Arthur felt Stacy's hand grip his as they waited for Elena's words from beyond the grave to determine their family's fate. Elena's wishes were very clear. Judge Bernard continued, her voice softer than it had been throughout the proceedings. She specifically stated that if anything threatened her children's emotional healing or their father's happiness, Dr. Morrison was authorized to intervene on their behalf. Victoria's face had gone pale. "What exactly did my sister write?" Judge Bernard read directly from Elena's letter. "If Victoria ever attempts to separate my children from Arthur based on his romantic relationships or remarriage, she is acting contrary to my explicit wishes. I want Arthur to find love again. I want my children to experience the joy of a blended family. The woman who can heal my family's grief deserves my eternal gratitude, not judgment or interference." The words hit the courtroom like lightning. Arthur felt tears burning his eyes as Elena's love and wisdom reached across death to protect the family she'd left behind. Dr. Morrison stepped forward again. Elena grew increasingly concerned about Victoria's controlling behavior during her final weeks. She witnessed Victoria's attempts to manage her medical decisions and realized her sister might try to control the family after her death. "These letters were for insurance policy. She asked me to ensure that love, not duty, guided decisions about the children's future." "There's more," Judge Bernard said, continuing to read. Elena wrote, "If a woman enters our family who loves Arthur and treats my children with genuine care, she should be welcomed, not resented. Daniel and Dara deserve a mother figure who understands healing, not someone who insists they hide their grief to maintain appearances." Victoria sank into her chair as Elena's words systematically dismantled her entire custody argument. The sister she'd claimed to represent had explicitly contradicted every point she'd made. Furthermore, Judge Bernard read, Elena requested that any potential custody disputes be resolved by asking the children themselves what they needed to heal. She wrote, "My babies have voices and hearts and opinions. Listen to them. Trust them. They will know who truly loves them." Arthur looked at his children, who had stopped crying and were listening with rapt attention to their mother's posthumous advocacy for their happiness. What would you do if someone tried to tear apart the love that was healing your broken family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more heart-wrenching stories. Dr. Morrison approached the bench with another document. "Your Honor, there's also this letter addressed specifically to Miss Black, to be delivered if she became part of the family's healing process." Stacy looked shocked as Dr. Morrison handed her a smaller envelope bearing her name in Elena's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it and read silently, tears streaming down her face. "Would you share the contents?" Judge Bernard asked gently. Stacy's voice shook as she read aloud, "Dear Stacy, if you are reading this, it means you have brought healing to my broken family. Thank you for loving them when I cannot. Thank you for teaching Arthur to live again instead of merely surviving. Thank you for showing my children that new love doesn't erase old love, it multiplies it. Please accept my blessing and my gratitude. Love, Elena." The courtroom was utterly silent except for the sound of muffled tears. Even some of the court personnel were openly crying at Elena's posthumous blessing of the family's healing. Arthur felt something shift fundamentally in his chest, not the replacement of his love for Elena, but the expansion of his heart to hold both his past and his future without conflict. Elena hadn't just given permission for his new life. She'd orchestrated its protection. Judge Bernard cleared her throat, visibly moved by Elena's letters. "In light of this new evidence and Elena Rapp's explicit wishes regarding her children's care, I am reversing my previous decision." Victoria's attorney tried desperately to object, But Judge Bernard silenced him with a raised hand. Custody will remain with Arthur Rep, with the understanding that Miss Black's role in the household must be formalized to address ethical concerns. I strongly encourage the expedited marriage that was discussed earlier. Arthur felt his knees go weak with relief as his children rushed toward him with joyful cries. Daniel and Dara threw themselves into his arms, and Stacy joined their embrace, all four of them finally united as the family they were meant to be. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by Victoria's anguished voice. "This isn't over," she said, her composure completely shattered. "There are other ways to protect those children from your mistakes, Arthur. Other legal avenues, other interested parties who won't be swayed by sentimental letters." Arthur looked up from his children's embrace to find Victoria's eyes burning with a fury that promised continued warfare. Dr. Morrison frowned at her threatening tone. "Victoria," Dr. Morrison said carefully, "Elena also left instructions about what to do if you refuse to accept her wishes regarding the children's welfare." Victoria's face went white as Dr. Morrison produced yet another sealed document. She anticipated that grief and jealousy might cloud your judgment. She asked me to remind you of certain family matters that might influence your perspective on this situation. The threat in Dr. Morrison's calm words was unmistakable. Whatever Elena had documented about Victoria was significant enough to change the entire dynamic of their conflict. "What are you talking about?" Victoria whispered, though her expression suggested she knew exactly what secrets Elena might have recorded. Dr. Morrison's smile was cold as winter morning. "Shall we discuss this privately, Victoria? Or would you prefer that I share Elena's observations about your marriage, your finances, and your relationship with your stepdaughter in open court?" Victoria's face cycled through shock, fear, and desperate calculation as she realized that Elena had left behind insurance against her interference. Insurance that could destroy Victoria's own carefully constructed life if she continued her attacks on Arthur's family. The power dynamic in the courtroom had shifted completely. But Arthur could see in Victoria's eyes that a cornered predator was often the most dangerous. Whatever secrets Elena had known, Victoria was weighing whether protecting them was worth abandoning her custody fight. And Arthur had the sinking feeling that Victoria might choose to burn everything down rather than admit defeat. The standoff between Dr. Morrison and Victoria crackled with tension as the courtroom held its collective breath. Arthur could see the calculation happening behind Victoria's eyes, weighing her desire to destroy his family against whatever devastating secrets Elena had documented about her own life. "You wouldn't dare," Victoria whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral. Though Arthur caught the steely determination beneath his calm exterior, Elena's cancer diagnosis came just as she was planning to confess everything to Arthur. She saw the illness as punishment for her deceptions and spent her final months trying to protect the family she'd endangered with her lies. Elena was very thorough in her observations about family dynamics. She wanted to ensure her children's protection from all potential threats to their well-being. Victoria's attorney, Chris Thornfield, sensed the shifting power dynamics and leaned forward urgently. "Victoria, perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any decisions about appeals or further legal action." But Victoria's pride had always been her weakness, and cornered pride often led to desperate decisions. Arthur watched with growing alarm as his sister-in-law's face hardened with the kind of resolve that preceded nuclear warfare. "Elena always thought she was so clever," Victoria said with bitter venom, "documenting everyone else's secrets while hiding her own. But I know things too, Arthur. Things about your precious wife that would destroy your children's memory of their perfect mother." The words hit like a physical blow. Arthur felt Stacy's protective hand on his arm as Daniel and Dara looked up with confused fear at their aunt's threatening tone. Dr. Morrison's expression darkened with warning. "Victoria, I strongly advise against that course of action." "Do you?" Victoria laughed harshly, her desperation making her reckless. "Because I have documentation too," medical records, private conversations, evidence of decisions Elena made during her treatment that would horrify those children if they knew. Arthur's blood turned to ice as he realized Victoria was threatening to destroy Elena's memory to win a custody battle she'd already lost. The woman would sacrifice everything, including her own sister's legacy, rather than admit defeat. Judge Bernards intervened with sharp authority. "Mrs. Caldwell, I strongly caution you about making inflammatory statements in my courtroom. The custody decision has been made based on compelling evidence." "Evidence can be challenged," Victoria replied coldly. "Medical records can be subpoenaed. Private decisions can be made public. If Arthur insists on this inappropriate marriage, perhaps the children should know exactly what kind of woman their sainted mother really was." The threat was clear and devastating. Victoria would destroy Elena's memory and traumatize Daniel and Dara all over again, rather than accept Arthur's happiness. It was emotional terrorism of the cruelest kind. Arthur stood slowly, his voice carrying the kind of quiet fury that had made him legendary in business negotiations. "Elena's memory is sacred to my children. If you threaten to tarnish that memory to serve your own purposes, you'll discover exactly how far I'll go to protect them." "Will I?" Victoria challenged. "Because I think you'll find that your resources, while impressive, can't compete with a woman who has nothing left to lose." The courtroom had become a battlefield where the collateral damage would be two traumatized children and the memory of a woman who died trying to protect them. Arthur felt the familiar sensation of impossible choices closing around him like a trap. Dr. Morrison stepped forward with calm determination. "Victoria, Elena anticipated this scenario as well. She knew that grief might make you cruel enough to attack her memory to hurt her family." He produced one file envelope, this one bearing official medical seals and legal documentation. "She authorized me to release specific medical information if you ever threatened to distort her treatment decisions or private conversations." Victoria's confident expression began cracking as Dr. Morrison continued. "Elena documented every conversation you had during her illness, including your suggestions that she should accept death with dignity instead of fighting for more time with her children. She recorded your complaints about the medical bills affecting the family trust. She noted your criticism of Arthur's excessive emotional support during her final weeks." Arthur watched in fascination as Victoria's face cycled through shock, fear, and growing horror. Whatever Elena had documented was clearly devastating to Victoria's carefully constructed image. "Elena was particularly troubled by your statement that children are resilient and get over grief quickly if adults don't indulge their sadness." Dr. Morrison continued relentlessly. "She found your advice to discourage Daniel and Dara from visiting during her final days especially concerning." The revelations hit like hammer blows. Victoria had counseled keeping the children away from their dying mother to avoid unnecessary trauma, directly contradicting everything she'd claimed about putting their needs first. "Those conversations were private," Victoria protested weakly. "And they'll remain private as long as you honor Elena's wishes for her family's future," Dr. Morrison replied. "But if you continue threatening to destroy Elena's memory or traumatize her children with medical information taken out of context, these documents will become public record." Arthur felt a surge of gratitude toward Elena's foresight and Dr. Morrison's protective intervention. His wife had anticipated every threat to their family's future and left behind the tools to neutralize Victoria's attacks. Victoria stood in the center of the courtroom, surrounded by the wreckage of her legal strategy and her own exposed cruelty. Her attorney was frantically reviewing documents, clearly realizing that any appeal would only expose more damaging evidence about his client's true motivations. "The choice is yours, Victoria," Dr. Morrison said with clinical precision. "Accept Elena's wishes for her family's happiness, or face the consequences of fighting a dead woman who was always smarter than you gave her credit for." The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Arthur held his children closer, feeling Stacy's steadying presence beside him as they waited for Victoria's decision about their family's future. Finally, Victoria's shoulders sagged in defeat. The fight went out of her like air from a punctured balloon, leaving behind only exhaustion and the bitter taste of exposed malice. "Fine," she whispered, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I withdraw all custody claims." Judge Bernards nodded with obvious relief. "Then this matter is concluded, Mr. Rapp retains full custody, and I encourage the expedited marriage to formalize family relationships." As the courtroom began emptying, Arthur felt the overwhelming weight of victory, mixed with sorrow for the family relationships that had been irreparably damaged. Victoria gathered her things with mechanical movements, looking decades older than when she'd entered. But as she reached the courtroom door, she turned back with one final look that made Arthur's blood chill. The defeat in her eyes had been replaced by something far more dangerous: cold calculation and the promise of future vengeance. "This isn't over, Arthur," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the empty courtroom like a death threat. "Enjoy your happiness while you can. But remember, family secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And Elena had more secrets than you could possibly imagine." With that cryptic warning, Victoria disappeared through the courtroom doors, leaving Arthur with the unsettling feeling that while they'd won this battle, the war for his family's peace was far from over. Dr. Morrison approached with Elena's remaining documents, his expression troubled. "Arthur, there's something else Elena left behind. Something she wasn't sure you were ready to know, but that Victoria might try to use against you in the future." Arthur's heart sank as he realized their victory might be more fragile than it appeared. "What kind of something?" "A letter explaining certain circumstances surrounding the twins' conception and birth. Elena was very specific that you should only read it if Victoria's threats escalated beyond today's legal proceedings." Stacy squeezed Arthur's hand supportively, but he could see questions forming in her amber eyes. What secrets about Daniel and Dara's birth could be significant enough for Elena to hide them, yet dangerous enough to document as insurance against future threats? "Do I need to read it now?" Arthur asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Dr. Morrison glanced toward the courtroom doors, where Victoria had disappeared. "She knows what's in this letter, Arthur, and if she's desperate enough, she might use that knowledge in ways that could devastate your family all over again." Arthur stared at the sealed envelope in Dr. Morrison's hands, realizing that Elena's protective measures might have created as many dangers as they'd resolved. Whatever secret his wife had hidden about their children could either save or destroy everything they'd fought to build. The choice of whether to open that final letter would determine not just his family's future, but whether the ghosts of the past would finally allow them to heal or drag them back into darkness they might never escape. Have you ever realized in a moment of crisis who truly matters most in your life? Tell me about the person who showed up when everything was falling apart. Share where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe love shows up strongest in our darkest hours. 3 weeks later, the Rapp mansion had been transformed from a tomb of grief into a home filled with love and laughter. Wedding preparations were in full swing, with Daniel and Dara throwing themselves into planning with the enthusiasm of children who finally felt secure in their family's future. "Miss Stacy, do you think Mama would like your wedding dress?" Dara asked as they reviewed floral arrangements in the sunlit morning room. Stacy knelt to Dara's level, her expression tender with understanding. "I think your Mama would love that we're honoring her memory while celebrating new beginnings. What do you think?" "I think she would want you to be happy," Dara said, with the wisdom of a child who'd learned to hold both grief and joy simultaneously. "And she would want Daddy to smile again." Arthur watched from the doorway, marveling at how naturally Stacy had slipped into the role of mother. The children called her Mom Stacy now, a title that honored their birth mother while embracing their expanding family. Daniel bounded into the room with wedding cake samples from the caterer, his face bright with excitement rather than the rage that had once consumed him. "Dad, you have to try the chocolate one. It tastes like the cake Mama used to make for birthdays." The reference to Elena brought smiles instead of tears now, a testament to the healing Stacy had guided them through. She'd taught them that remembering their mother with joy was the greatest tribute they could offer her memory. But Arthur's contentment was shadowed by Dr. Morrison's final letter, still unopened in his desk drawer. Victoria had made no move against them since the custody hearing, but her parting threat echoed in his mind during quiet moments. What secret about his children's birth could she use to destroy their hard-won happiness? The morning of the wedding dawned with perfect autumn sunshine, painting the mansion's gardens in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to celebrate love's triumph over loss. Arthur stood before Elena's gravestone in his wedding suit, feeling the need to speak with his first wife before marrying his second. "I hope you understand," he said quietly to the marble marker. "I hope you know that loving Stacy doesn't diminish what we had. She's teaching me that hearts can hold infinite love without betrayal." A gentle breeze stirred the fallen leaves around Elena's grave, and Arthur chose to interpret it as blessing rather than reproach. His wife had loved him enough to orchestrate protection for their family's future happiness. Surely that same love would want him to embrace the joy Stacy brought to their lives. The wedding ceremony was held in the mansion's rose garden, surrounded by flowers Elena had planted and tended with such care. As Arthur waited at the altar with Daniel and Dara beside him as ring-bearers, he felt Elena's presence as a blessing rather than a haunting. Stacy appeared at the garden's entrance in an elegant ivory gown that complemented her curves beautifully, her natural hair styled in soft curls crowned with Elena's pearl tiara, a gesture that honored the past while embracing the future. Her radiant smile as she walked toward him made Arthur's heart soar with gratitude for second chances. "You look beautiful," Arthur whispered as she joined him at the altar. "You look happy," Stacy replied, her amber eyes shining with tears of joy. Finally, completely happy. The ceremony was intimate and meaningful, attended by close friends who'd watched Arthur's journey from devastating grief to renewed hope. Dr. Morrison served as best man, his presence a reminder of Elena's continuing protection over their family. As they exchanged vows, Arthur felt the final walls around his heart crumble completely. "I promise to love you with the fullness of a heart that understands how precious and fragile happiness can be," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to cherish every day we have together and build a family where love multiplies instead of diminishes." Stacy's vows brought tears to every eye in the garden. "I promise to honor the love that came before me while building new love that will last forever. I promise to be the mother Daniel and Dara deserve, and the wife you thought you'd never find again." When they kissed as husband and wife, the children cheered with pure joy, and Arthur felt Elena's blessing settle over them like sunshine after a long winter. This was love transcending death, not betraying it, healing that honored the past while embracing the future. The reception continued into the evening, filled with dancing, laughter, and the kind of celebration that Elena would have loved. Arthur danced first with his new wife, then with his children, feeling truly complete for the first time since Elena's death. But as the evening wound down and guests began departing, Dr. Morrison approached Arthur with a troubled expression. "I need to speak with you privately," he said quietly. "There's been a development regarding Victoria." Arthur's contentment evaporated as he followed Dr. Morrison into his study, where Elena's final letter still waited in the desk drawer. "What kind of development?" "She's hired a private investigator," Dr. Morrison said grimly. "Someone with connections to overseas adoption agencies. Arthur, she's digging into the twins' birth records." Arthur's blood turned to ice as the implications crashed over him. Whatever Elena had hidden about Daniel and Dara's conception, Victoria was determined to uncover it and use it as a weapon against their family. "How much time do we have?" Arthur asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the desk drawer containing Elena's letter. "Not long," Dr. Morrison replied. "The investigator has contacts in European medical facilities. If there's something to find, he'll find it within days." Arthur stared at the drawer that contained either salvation or destruction, realizing that his wedding night might be the last peaceful moment his family would know. Whatever secret Elena had hidden, Victoria was closing in on it. And once she found it, their entire world might come crashing down around them. The choice was no longer whether to read Elena's final letter. It was whether to read it now and prepare for the storm, or wait for Victoria to weaponize whatever truth it contained. Arthur reached for the drawer handle, knowing that opening Elena's final secret would either save his family or destroy everything they'd fought to build. The future of his marriage, his children's stability, and their hard-won happiness hung in the balance, as he prepared to discover what his late wife had been so desperate to hide and so determined to protect them from. Arthur's hands trembled as he pulled Elena's final letter from the desk drawer, the cream-colored envelope feeling heavier than any business contract he'd ever signed. Dr. Morrison stood by the window, giving Arthur privacy while remaining close enough to provide support for whatever revelation awaited. Elena dated this letter 3 days before she died, Dr. Morrison said quietly. She was very specific that you should only read it if Victoria's threats escalated to investigating the children's birth. Arthur broke the seal with careful reverence, unfolding pages covered in Elena's increasingly weak handwriting. The first lines made his heart skip with dread. My dearest Arthur, if you are reading this, it means our family is under attack, and you need to know the truth about Daniel and Dara's conception. I pray you can forgive me for keeping this secret, but I believed it was the only way to protect our children from a truth that could destroy their sense of identity. Arthur's mouth went dry as he continued reading, each word hitting like a physical blow. The fertility treatments we underwent were not successful in the way we believed. Dr. Philip switched our embryos without our knowledge or consent, using donor genetic material from his private program. Daniel and Dara are not biologically yours, my love. They are not biologically mine either. The letter slipped from Arthur's nerveless fingers as the magnitude of Elena's secret crashed over him. His children, the twins he'd loved since before their birth, whom he'd raised and cherished and fought to protect, were not his biological offspring. Dr. Morrison moved quickly to Arthur's side as he sank into his chair, overcome by the revelation. Arthur, Elena was very clear about one thing. This changes nothing about who those children are or how much they love you. They're not mine, Arthur whispered, his voice hollow with shock. All this time, I thought, Elena let me believe. She let you believe you were their father, because you are their father, Dr. Morrison said firmly. Biology doesn't determine love, Arthur. You raised them, protected them, fought for them. That makes you their father, more than any genetic test ever could. Arthur forced himself to pick up the letter again, reading Elena's explanation through tears. I discovered the truth during routine blood work early in my pregnancy. Dr. Philip had been running an illegal embryo program, using genetic material from anonymous donors without patients' knowledge. When I confronted him, he threatened to expose the situation publicly if I reported him, knowing it would devastate you and potentially invalidate our parental rights. The letter continued with Elena's agonizing decision to keep the secret rather than risk losing the children they'd wanted so desperately. I chose to protect our family rather than seek justice. Dr. Philip has since died, taking most of his records with him. But Victoria somehow learned the truth during my final treatment. She was present during a conversation with my medical team when blood type discrepancies were discussed. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she filed away information that could be weaponized later. Arthur's mind raced through the implications. Victoria knew the twins weren't his biological children, and she was now hiring investigators to prove it. If she succeeded, she could challenge his parental rights entirely, claiming he had no legal standing as their guardian. There's more, Arthur said, continuing to read Elena's desperate words. The adoption was never formalized because we believed the children were naturally conceived. If Victoria can prove the genetic deception, she might be able to claim that you have no legal rights as their father. But Arthur, listen to me. You have been their father from the moment they were born. You are the only father they have ever known. Don't let Victoria's cruelty make you doubt that truth. Dr. Morrison watched Arthur process the devastating revelation, ready to intervene if grief or shock became overwhelming. Elena included legal documents with this letter, he said gently. Steps you can take to formalize your parental rights if Victoria forces the issue. Arthur looked up from the letter with anguished eyes. How do I tell Stacy? How do I tell the children? Everything they believe about their identity, their heritage, their place in this family, it's all built on a lie. It's built on love. Dr. Morrison corrected firmly. Elena's letter explains that she chose to protect that love rather than expose a truth that would only cause pain. She made the same choice any parent would make. Arthur stood abruptly, pacing the study as Elena's revelation shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. Victoria can use this to destroy us completely. If she proves I'm not their biological father, she can claim I have no custody rights at all. Which is why Elena left detailed instructions for protecting the family legally, Dr. Morrison said, producing another set of documents. Emergency adoption papers, sworn affidavits about your relationship with the children, medical records documenting your involvement in their care from birth. Arthur stared at the legal paperwork that could formalize what his heart had always known, that Daniel and Dara were his children in every way that mattered. But the process would require time they might not have, and Victoria's investigator was already closing in on the truth. A soft knock on the study door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Stacy entered wearing her silk wedding robe, her face glowing with newlywed happiness that Arthur feared he was about to shatter. "I was wondering where my husband disappeared to," she said with gentle teasing, then noticed the documents scattered across the desk and Arthur's devastated expression. "What's wrong? What's happened?" Arthur looked at this remarkable woman who had married him hours ago, who had committed to being a mother to children she believed were his biological offspring. How could he ask her to stay when their entire foundation was built on deception she'd known nothing about? "Stacy," he began, his voice breaking, "there's something about Daniel and Dara that I just learned, something that changes everything about our family." Stacy moved toward him with the same calm competence she'd shown during every crisis. Her amber eyes focused entirely on his pain. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means." Arthur handed her Elena's letter with trembling hands, watching her face as she read the devastating truth about the twins' conception. He waited for shock, disappointment, perhaps even regret about marrying into such a complicated situation. Instead, Stacy set down the letter and looked at him with fierce determination. So, Arthur repeated in disbelief. "Stacy, the children aren't mine. I have no biological connection to them. Victoria can use this to take them away completely." "The children aren't yours?" Stacy's voice rose with incredulous anger. "Arthur Rapp, you carried Daniel when he had nightmares. You learned to braid Dara's hair when she needed you to. You fought a custody battle to protect them. You chose love over fear every single day for 9 years. How dare you say they're not yours?" Arthur stared at his wife, amazed by her fierce defense of truths he'd forgotten in his shock. "But legally, we'll fight," Stacy interrupted. "We'll formalize adoptions, hire the best attorneys, do whatever it takes. But don't you dare let Victoria's cruelty make you doubt your relationship with those children for 1 second." Dr. Morrison smiled with approval. "Elena would like her very much," he said quietly. Arthur felt some of his panic subsiding as Stacy's unwavering support reminded him of what truly mattered. Biology hadn't created their family bond. Love had. And no investigation or legal challenge could change 9 years of shared memories, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and unconditional devotion. "We need to start the adoption process immediately," Arthur said, his resolve strengthening, "before Victoria's investigator finds what he's looking for." "Already arranged," Dr. Morrison replied, producing legal documents. Elena set up emergency procedures with a family law firm that specializes in exactly these situations. They can begin paperwork tomorrow. Arthur felt a surge of gratitude for Elena's foresight, but also deep sorrow that his wife had carried such a burden alone during her final months. She'd protected their family even from the grave, anticipating every threat and preparing defenses they'd never known they needed. "There's one more thing," Dr. Morrison said hesitantly. "Elena's letter includes instructions about telling the children. She was very specific about how and when they should learn the truth about their conception." Arthur's heart sank as he realized they would eventually need to explain to Daniel and Dara that their entire understanding of their genetic heritage was false. How do you tell children that their dead mother kept such a fundamental secret about their identity? Elena recommended waiting until they're older, unless Victoria forces the revelation, Dr. Morrison continued. She felt that at 9 years old, they're too young to process such complex information without feeling rejected or confused about their place in the family. Stacy nodded thoughtfully. Children that age tend to interpret biological differences as meaning they don't belong or aren't wanted. It could undo all the healing work we've accomplished. Arthur made his decision with the kind of decisive authority that had built his empire. Then, we protect them from that knowledge until Victoria forces our hand. We proceed with adoption paperwork quietly and hope we can formalize everything before she strikes. Dr. Morrison gathered Elena's documents with careful precision. I'll coordinate with the legal team first thing tomorrow. In the meantime, try to act normally. Don't let the children sense that anything has changed. As Dr. Morrison left, Arthur collapsed into his chair, emotionally exhausted by the evening's revelations. Stacy moved behind him, her hands gently massaging the tension from his shoulders. Elena must have been terrified, Stacy said softly. Knowing the secret could destroy the family she loved so much, but also knowing that revealing it might hurt you and the children. She protected us, even when it meant suffering alone, Arthur replied, his voice thick with emotion. I just hope we can honor that sacrifice by keeping our family together. Stacy leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his temple. We will. Victoria may know our secret, but she underestimates our love. Biology didn't make you Daniel and Dara's father. Choice did. Every day for 9 years, you chose to love them. That's not something any investigation can invalidate. Arthur turned in his chair to face his wife, drawing strength from her unwavering support. I love you, Stacy Blackwrap. I love you for seeing our family's truth, even when I was blinded by fear. I love you too, she replied, sealing the promise with a tender kiss. All of you, forever. But their moment of connection was shattered by the sound of Arthur's phone buzzing with an urgent message. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood turn to ice. The text was from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from Victoria. Congratulations on your wedding, Arthur. I hope you enjoyed the celebration because I've just received some very interesting information from my investigator. We need to talk tonight. Come alone to Elena's grave at midnight, or I'll be filing emergency custody papers at dawn that will take those children away permanently. And this time, no dead sister's letters will save you. Arthur showed the message to Stacy, watching her face pale as she realized their brief happiness was about to be shattered by Victoria's most devastating attack yet. She knows, Stacy whispered. She found the truth about the twins. Arthur checked his watch, 11:15 p.m. In 45 minutes, he would have to face Victoria's final ultimatum, knowing that his children's entire future hung in the balance. Whatever terms she offered would likely be impossible to accept, but refusing might mean losing Daniel and Dara forever. I have to go, Arthur said grimly, reaching for his coat. Not alone, Stacy replied, already moving toward the door. We're married now, Arthur. Whatever Victoria threatens us with, we face it together. As they prepared to leave for what could be the final battle for their family's survival, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across from the mansion's gates. Victoria's investigator had been watching all evening, documenting every visitor and conversation, and in his passenger seat sat someone whose presence would make Victoria's ultimatum even more devastating than Arthur could possibly imagine. Someone from the twins' past who could either save or destroy everything they'd fought to build. The midnight confrontation at Elena's grave would determine not just the custody of Daniel and Dara, but whether love could truly triumph over the darkest secrets and most vicious threats. As Arthur and Stacy drove through the night toward their family's ultimate test, they had no idea that Victoria had one final card to play, a card that would force them to choose between protecting the children's innocence and losing them forever. The cemetery gates stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow them as Arthur and Stacy drove through the darkness toward Elena's grave. Moonlight cast eerie shadows between the headstones, and Arthur felt the weight of every decision that had led to this midnight confrontation pressing down on his shoulders. Whatever she threatens us with, Stacy said quietly, her hand gripping his, remember that Daniel and Dara chose us. They call me Mom Stacy. They trust you completely. They've healed in our care. No investigation can change those facts. Arthur parked near the family mausoleum where Elena rested, his headlights illuminating Victoria's figure, standing beside the marble headstone. But his blood chilled when he realized she wasn't alone. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s stood beside her, his face familiar from photographs Arthur had seen in Elena's medical files. "Dr. Philip," Arthur breathed, recognizing the fertility specialist who had supposedly died years ago. "But Elena said he was dead." "Elena told you I was dead because I asked her to," Dr. Philip said coldly. "After the fertility clinic scandal broke in Europe, I needed to disappear from public view. Elena agreed to tell everyone I had died to protect both our secrets. I've been living quietly in Switzerland ever since. Elena said many things to protect her secrets." Victoria called out as Arthur and Stacy approached. "But Dr. Philip is very much alive, and he has some fascinating information about the twins' true parentage." Arthur felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as Dr. Philip stepped forward with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. If the doctor was alive, he could verify every detail of the genetic deception and potentially reveal even more devastating truths. "Mr. Rapp," Dr. Philip said with clinical detachment, "I understand you've recently learned about the irregularities in your fertility treatment. I'm here to clarify some misconceptions your late wife may have shared." "You mean the lies you told her about switching our embryos?" Arthur demanded, his protective instincts flaring. "The deception that stole our genetic connection to our children." Dr. Philip smiled coldly. "Actually, I'm here to tell you that Elena lied about that too. The embryos were never switched, Mr. Rapp. Daniel and Dara are indeed your biological children." The words hit Arthur like lightning, completely upending everything he'd believed since reading Elena's letter. "That's impossible. Elena's letter clearly stated." "Elena's letter was designed to protect a much more devastating secret," Victoria interrupted with vicious satisfaction. "One that Dr. Philip is now prepared to reveal unless you agree to my terms." Arthur felt Stacy's steadying presence beside him as his world tilted dangerously. If the twins were his biological children, then what secret had Elena been so desperate to hide that she'd fabricated an entire story about genetic deception? "The truth is much simpler and much more damaging," Dr. Philip continued with professional calm. "Elena was having an affair during your fertility treatments. She became pregnant naturally with another man's children while you were paying for expensive procedures. Rather than admit her infidelity, she allowed you to believe the twins were conceived through our program." The revelation hit Arthur like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his knees weak. Elena, his devoted, loving Elena, had been unfaithful during the most vulnerable period of their marriage, when they were desperately trying to conceive. "You're lying," Stacy said fiercely, stepping protectively in front of Arthur. "Elena would never. Wouldn't she?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "My sister was always good at playing the perfect wife while hiding her true nature. Dr. Philip has hotel records, photographs, DNA evidence from the biological father. Elena's carefully crafted image of devoted motherhood was all an elaborate lie." Arthur stared at Elena's gravestone, trying to process the magnitude of her deception. If this was true, then everything he'd believed about their marriage, their children's conception, their entire family foundation was built on betrayal and lies. "Who?" Arthur asked, his voice barely audible. "Who was the father?" Dr. Philip produced a manila folder with the efficiency of a man accustomed to destroying lives. "Robert Kane, your former business partner. The affair lasted 6 months, ending only when Elena discovered she was pregnant and chose to end the relationship to preserve her marriage." The name hit Arthur like a sledgehammer. Robert Kane, his trusted friend and business partner, the man who had been best man at his wedding, who had held Daniel and Dara as newborns, who had comforted Arthur during Elena's illness. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Arthur felt his sanity threatening to fracture. Robert moved to Singapore shortly after the twins were born. Victoria continued with cruel precision. Elena convinced him that maintaining distance was best for everyone involved, but Dr. Philip maintained contact with him over the years, keeping detailed records of the situation. Stacy moved closer to Arthur, her protective instincts in full force despite her own shock at these revelations. Even if this is true, it doesn't change the fact that Arthur has been their father for 9 years. He's raised them, loved them, protected them. But he's not their biological father, Victoria interrupted triumphantly. Which means my custody petition was valid all along. Robert Kane has parental rights that supersede Arthur's emotional attachment, and he's very interested in meeting his children. Arthur's head snapped up as the full scope of Victoria's trap became clear. Robert is here, in Boston? He arrived this morning, Victoria confirmed with vicious satisfaction. Dr. Philip contacted him about the custody situation, and he immediately flew in to meet his biological children. As their genetic father, he has legal standing to challenge your custody, especially now that you know the truth about Elena's deception. The cemetery seemed to spin around Arthur as he realized the devastating completeness of Victoria's revenge. She hadn't just discovered Elena's secret. She'd weaponized it by contacting the biological father and convincing him to claim parental rights. Where is he? Arthur demanded, though part of him dreaded the answer. Waiting at the mansion, Victoria replied with cold triumph. I gave him a key. After all, as the children's biological father, he has every right to meet them. They're probably having their first conversation right now. Arthur's protective fury exploded like a volcano. The thought of Robert Kane, the man who had betrayed his friendship and fathered his children through deception, alone with Daniel and Dara, was unacceptable beyond measure. If he's hurt them or frightened them, Arthur began, but Victoria cut him off. He's their father, Arthur. He has every right to form a relationship with them, just as he has every right to seek custody of children who were stolen from him by Elena's lies. Arthur turned toward his car, desperate to return to the mansion and protect his children, but Dr. Phillips stepped into his path with threatening calm. There's more you need to understand, the doctor said coldly. Robert has been paying child support through an offshore account for 9 years. Elena was receiving money from him monthly through her separate business account, the one you knew she maintained for freelance consulting work. She told you those earnings came from design projects, and you never questioned the amounts because you trusted her completely. She used that trust to hide her betrayal. She was essentially blackmailing him for silence while allowing you to raise his children. Each revelation hit Arthur like successive hammer blows. Elena hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been financially benefiting from her deception for years, using Robert's guilt and fear of exposure to fund their family's lifestyle. Elena confided everything to me during her final weeks, Victoria said with bitter satisfaction. The pain medication made her talkative, and she felt guilty about her secrets. She told me about the affair, the money, the lies, thinking I would help her find a way to tell you the truth. Instead, I kept it all as insurance for exactly this moment. Elena kept detailed records of the arrangement, Victoria added with vicious satisfaction. Bank statements, email communications, even recordings of conversations with Robert about maintaining the secret. She documented everything, including her plans to eventually tell you the truth after the children were grown. Arthur felt his memories of Elena crumbling like sandcastles in a hurricane. The woman he'd mourned, idealized, and felt guilty about replacing had been living a double life of deception that made their entire marriage feel like an elaborate performance. Why? Arthur whispered, looking at Elena's gravestone with devastated confusion. Why would she do this to us? Because she was selfish and manipulative, Victoria replied without mercy. Because she wanted the security of marriage to you and the passion of an affair with Robert. She wanted your money, his genetics, and the social status of being a rap. So she created an elaborate lie that gave her everything she wanted. Stacy stepped forward with fierce determination, her voice cutting through Arthur's spiraling despair. None of this changes who Daniel and Dara are or who Arthur is to them. Biology doesn't determine love or family bonds. Those children have known Arthur as their father their entire lives. That's what matters. Tell that to a family court. Dr. Phillips said, with clinical coldness. Robert Kane is a successful businessman with no criminal record and a genetic connection to the children. Arthur is a man who was deceived into raising another man's offspring, and has no legal standing once the truth is revealed. Arthur felt the trap closing completely around him. Victoria had orchestrated the perfect revenge, exposing Elena's lies while providing the biological father with both motive and means to claim custody. Even as Arthur fought the legal battle, the trauma of learning about their mother's deception and their true parentage would devastate Daniel and Dara. "What do you want?" Arthur asked finally, his voice hollow with defeat. Victoria's smile was coldly triumphant. "I want you to walk away. Give me custody of the children, end this inappropriate marriage, and disappear from their lives. In exchange, I'll convince Robert to allow supervised visits and keep Elena's other secrets buried." "Other secrets?" Stacy demanded. "Oh, there are so many more," Victoria replied with vicious satisfaction. "Elena's gambling addiction that she hid by using Robert's money, her prescription drug abuse during the final months of her illness, her plans to leave Arthur entirely once the children were older and claim half his assets in divorce proceedings." Each revelation felt like a physical assault, stripping away every positive memory Arthur had of his marriage and replacing them with evidence of elaborate deception. The woman he'd grieved and idealized had been systematically betraying him for years. But as Arthur stood among the ruins of everything he believed about his life, he heard Elena's voice echoing from one of her final conversations. "The children are what matter, Arthur. Whatever happens to me, protect Daniel and Dara. Love them enough to make the hard choices." Suddenly, clarity cut through the chaos like a blade. Elena's deceptions were devastating, but her final instruction remained true. The children were what mattered. Daniel and Dara needed protection from this psychological warfare, not exposure to devastating truths about their mother's lies. Arthur straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Victoria with the authority that had built his empire. "No." "No?" Victoria repeated in disbelief. "I said no," Arthur replied with growing strength. "You can expose Elena's lies. You can bring Robert here to claim genetic parentage. You can drag us through every court in Massachusetts. But I will not abandon my children to protect them from consequences of their mother's choices." Dr. Phillips stepped forward threateningly. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Rapp. Robert has lawyers, genetic evidence, and legal standing. You have nothing but emotional attachment." "I have 9 years of being their father," Arthur replied fiercely. "I have bedtime stories, and scraped knees, and homework help, and midnight fevers. I have Christmas mornings and birthday parties, and every day they've ever needed someone to love them unconditionally. Robert Kane has DNA. I have everything else." Stacy moved to stand beside Arthur, her support unwavering despite the shocking revelations about Elena's deception. "And I have 6 weeks of helping them heal from trauma, teaching them to process grief, showing them that love doesn't end when people die. We're their family, Victoria, not because of genetics, but because of choice." Victoria's confident expression began showing cracks of uncertainty. "Robert has money for legal battles. He has motivation to claim his children. You can't fight genetics and parental rights." "Watch me," Arthur said with quiet determination. "I've fought hostile takeovers, federal investigations, and your custody petition. I'll fight Robert Kane and anyone else who threatens my children's well-being." As if summoned by their confrontation, the sound of approaching cars filled the cemetery. Arthur turned to see 2 vehicles pulling through the gates. One he recognized as Dr. Morrison's sedan, the other an unfamiliar black SUV. Dr. Morrison emerged from his car with purposeful stride, followed by a man Arthur immediately recognized as Robert Kane. Even after 9 years, his former business partner looked essentially unchanged, tall, distinguished, and carrying himself with the confidence of success. "Arthur," Robert called out as he approached, his voice carrying a mixture of guilt and determination. "I think it's time we talked." The confrontation Arthur had been dreading was finally here, face to face with the man who had fathered his children through betrayal. Surrounded by the ruins of Elena's elaborate deceptions, Arthur prepared for the battle that would determine his family's future. But as Robert drew closer, Arthur noticed something unexpected in his former friend's expression. Not the triumphant confidence of a man claiming his children, but the nervous uncertainty of someone carrying his own devastating burden of guilt and regret. This final confrontation was about to become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. "Hello, Arthur," Robert said quietly, stopping several feet away with obvious discomfort. "I know you have every reason to hate me. What Elena and I did was unforgivable." Arthur studied his former friend's face, looking for signs of the man who had betrayed their friendship so completely. "Victoria says you want custody of Daniel and Dara." "Victoria says a lot of things," Robert replied with surprising firmness, "but she doesn't speak for me." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, with legal documents in hand. "Robert contacted me after Dr. Philip reached out to him. He wanted to understand the full situation before making any decisions about the children." Arthur felt a flicker of hope, though he remained cautious. "And what did you decide?" Robert looked directly at Arthur with obvious pain. "I've spent 9 years knowing I had children I could never acknowledge because Elena convinced me that revealing the truth would destroy them. When Dr. Philip contacted me about this custody battle, I realized I had one chance to actually protect them by ensuring Arthur's legal rights were secure, rather than claiming children who don't even know I exist. I decided that I gave up any right to call myself their father the moment I walked away 9 years ago. You've been everything to those children that I never was and never could be." Victoria's confident expression crumbled into shock. "Robert, we discussed this. You have legal rights." "I have genetic contribution," Robert corrected firmly. "Arthur has everything else that matters. I'm not here to claim custody, Victoria. I'm here to renounce any parental rights I might have and ensure that Arthur's adoption of the children is legally ironclad." The unexpected declaration hit the cemetery like lightning. Arthur stared at his former friend in amazement, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You see, Arthur," Robert continued with obvious emotion, "I spent 9 years knowing I had children I could never acknowledge, watching from a distance as you raised them with the love I was too cowardly to provide. When Dr. Philip contacted me about this custody battle, I realized I had one chance to do the right thing." Dr. Morrison produced legal documents with efficient precision. Robert has already signed papers formally relinquishing all parental rights and supporting Arthur's petition for legal adoption. The financial support Elena was receiving has been transferred to a trust fund for the children's education. Victoria's face cycled through shock, fury, and desperate calculation as her final weapon was dismantled by Robert's unexpected nobility. "You can't do this. Those children are yours." "Those children are Arthur's," Robert said with absolute finality. "They always have been. I contributed genetics, but Arthur gave them everything that actually matters: love, security, protection, devotion. I won't destroy their stability to satisfy your need for revenge." Arthur felt his world shifting again, but this time toward hope rather than despair. The man who could have claimed his children was instead choosing to protect them, recognizing that fatherhood was about far more than biological connection. "There's something else," Robert continued, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Elena wrote me letters over the years. Letters about the children, about her guilt over our affair, about her love for you and regret for the deception. She asked me to give you this if the truth ever came out." Arthur took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing Elena's handwriting on an envelope marked, "For Arthur, with all my love and deepest apologies." "I'll leave you to read that privately," Robert said with quiet dignity. "But Arthur, I want you to know, Elena loved you completely. The affair was my fault, my pursuit, my selfishness. She ended it the moment she realized she was pregnant because she couldn't bear to hurt you any more than she already had." As Robert walked back toward his car, he paused to address Victoria with cold finality. "Your sister made mistakes, but she spent the rest of her life trying to protect the family she loved. Don't dishonor her memory by continuing this vindictive campaign against people who are healing from grief." Victoria stood alone beside Elena's grave as her support structure collapsed completely. Dr. Philip had already disappeared into the darkness, and Robert's defection left her without leverage or allies. "This isn't over," she said weakly, but the threat lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Arthur replied with quiet authority. Elena's mistakes don't change the fact that Daniel and Dara are my children and Stacy is their mother. We're going home to our family, and you're going to leave us alone. As Arthur and Stacy walked back toward their car, Dr. Morrison fell into step beside them. The adoption papers will be filed first thing Monday morning. With Robert's cooperation and Elena's letter supporting your parental bond, there shouldn't be any legal obstacles. Arthur clutched Elena's final letter in his hand, feeling the weight of secrets and revelations, love and betrayal, truth and healing, all converging into a moment of profound closure. Whatever Elena had written in her last communication to him, it would help him understand the woman he'd loved, lost, and was finally ready to remember, with both compassion and clarity. "Are you ready to go home?" Stacy asked gently, her hand finding his in the darkness. Arthur looked back at Elena's grave one final time, no longer seeing it as a shrine to perfect love, but as a resting place for a flawed woman who had made terrible choices, but ultimately fought to protect the family she'd endangered with her deceptions. "Yes," Arthur said, squeezing Stacy's hand with gratitude for her unwavering support through every revelation and crisis. "Let's go home to our children." As they drove through the night toward the mansion where Daniel and Dara waited safely sleeping, Arthur felt the final pieces of his shattered world reorganizing into something stronger and more honest than what had come before. Elena's secrets had been exposed, Victoria's threats neutralized, and Robert's unexpected nobility had cleared the path for legal recognition of what his heart had always known. He was Daniel and Dara's father, not because of genetics or deception, but because of 9 years of unconditional love, daily devotion, and the choice to put their well-being above everything else in his life. And now, with Stacy beside him as his partner in love and parenting, their family was finally, truly, completely whole. Sage King's closing reflection: sometimes the most profound healing comes not from avoiding painful truths, but from facing them with courage and choosing love anyway. Arthur learned that fatherhood isn't determined by DNA or perfect circumstances, but by the daily choice to show up for the people who need you most. Elena's deceptions could have destroyed their family, but instead, they revealed the unshakable foundation of genuine love that had sustained Arthur and his children through their darkest days. Stacy's unwavering support proved that the best relationships aren't built on perfect histories, but on the commitment to face imperfect realities together. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and exposing painful truths? Or watched love triumph over the most devastating betrayals? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories inspire and heal others going through similar journeys. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories of love, redemption, and second chances. Tomorrow we have another incredible tale of unexpected love that will leave you breathless. Remember that your heart's capacity for love is infinite. Never let fear, past betrayals, or others' expectations convince you otherwise. Love finds us when we least expect it, but need it most. And it has the power to heal even the most broken families when we have the courage to choose it over fear. Join us tomorrow for another passionate romance that proves healing is possible. Families are built on love rather than perfection, and second chances can create even stronger foundations than first ones ever did.